In the popular imagination, medieval castles often appear as places of strength, permanence, and protection. Their thick stone walls, towering battlements, and commanding positions on hills or river bends suggest security and endurance. Yet behind this image of strength was a quieter, more persistent reality. One that shaped daily life far more than warfare ever did. For most people who lived within them, castles were not primarily symbols of power. They were environments, and as environments, they were defined less by grandeur and more by temperature, drafts, dampness, and the constant effort required to remain comfortable inside stone. Stone, despite its appearance of solidity, is a poor material for retaining warmth. It absorbs cold slowly and releases it even more slowly, meaning that once a castle became chilled, whether by winter air or long nights, it tended to remain cold for extended periods. Unlike modern buildings, there was no insulation, no sealed glazing, and no central heating system to stabilize the interior climate. The result was that many castles, particularly in Northern Europe, existed in a state that modern occupants would describe as perpetually cool, if not outright cold. This reality began with the very purpose for which castles were designed. Early medieval fortifications were military structures first and residences second. Their primary goal was defense, resisting siege engines, arrows, and fire, not providing comfort. Walls were built thick to withstand attack. Windows were kept narrow to prevent entry. Open interior spaces allowed soldiers to move quickly. Every one of these defensive advantages came at the cost of warmth. Narrow windows reduced sunlight. High ceilings allowed heat to rise away from occupants. Stone floors conducted cold upward from the ground. Even in seasons that were not severe, the interior climate could remain noticeably cooler than the surrounding air. In winter, the difference became far more pronounced. Medieval winters in much of Britain, northern France, and the Germanic regions were long, damp, and penetrating rather than dramatically snowy. Moisture in the air made cold feel heavier. Inside a stone structure, that dampness could linger in walls, tapestries, and wooden furnishings. The sensation was not simply cold, but a persistent chill that seemed to settle into surfaces and remain there. Fireplaces were the primary defense against this environment. Large hearths were built into great halls, chambers, and kitchens. Yet even substantial fires struggled to heat the massive air volume of a stone hall. Heat radiated outward but quickly dissipated upward into rafters and high ceilings. As a result, warmth tended to exist only in localized pockets near the fire itself. People adapted by arranging their daily routines around these pockets of heat. Seating, dining, and conversation naturally gathered close to the hearth. Servants moved constantly, adding fuel, adjusting embers, and maintaining airflow. Fire management was not an occasional task but a continuous one. Even so, the warmth produced was temporary. Once a fire burned low, the surrounding stone, still cold, would gradually pull heat away from the room again. In effect, castles behaved like enormous heat sinks, absorbing warmth faster than it could be sustained. Because of this, medieval inhabitants relied heavily on textiles as a secondary layer of environmental control. Tapestries, often seen today as decorative art, served a practical function. Hung along interior walls, they created a thin buffer between living space and cold stone. This reduced drafts and slightly slowed the transfer of cold into occupied areas. Heavy curtains served a similar purpose. Beds were often enclosed with thick fabric hangings, not for privacy alone, but to trap body heat during sleep. Within these enclosed spaces, a person's warmth could accumulate enough to create a noticeably more comfortable microclimate. Clothing also reflected the architectural reality. Multiple layers were standard even indoors. Wool, fur linings, and padded garments were not reserved exclusively for outdoor travel. They were part of everyday interior life during colder months. To modern observers, the idea of wearing outer layers inside one's own residence may seem unusual. In the medieval context, however, the distinction between indoor and outdoor climates was far less pronounced than it is today. Another adaptation involved the organization of space itself. Despite their large appearance, many castles gradually evolved to include smaller, more private chambers. These rooms were easier to heat and maintain. Over time, residential sections became more compartmentalized, reflecting an architectural shift from purely defensive design toward habitability. This transition can be observed especially in later medieval castles, where comfort began to compete more directly with military necessity. Yet even these improvements did not eliminate the fundamental challenge posed by stone construction. Moisture remained a constant presence. Condensation formed on interior surfaces. Wooden furniture could absorb dampness. Bedding required regular airing to prevent mildew. In some regions, rushes or straw were spread on floors not only for insulation but to absorb moisture and improve footing. Daily maintenance was therefore not merely about cleanliness but environmental survival within the structure. Sleep, in particular, was deeply shaped by these conditions. Nighttime temperatures dropped further, and without sustained fires in every chamber, many rooms became markedly colder after dusk. Bed curtains, shared sleeping arrangements, and layered blankets were practical responses. Body heat, whether from family members, attendants, or even animals in certain lower status settings, played an important role in maintaining warmth. What modern heating systems accomplish mechanically, medieval households achieved through proximity and layering. It is important to note that discomfort was not always perceived as unusual by those who lived with it. Human perception adjusts to repeated conditions. Over generations, expectations of indoor warmth were simply different. A cool interior was not necessarily interpreted as a failure of design but as a normal feature of stone living. In this sense, permanence and discomfort were closely linked. Stone castles endured for centuries precisely because of their mass and durability. That same mass, however, ensured that they would always resist rapid changes in temperature. The qualities that made them symbols of stability also made them difficult places to keep warm. This trade-off was rarely questioned because defense, status, and longevity were considered more important than comfort. Over time, as warfare technology evolved and the need for fortified residences declined, architectural priorities shifted. Windows became larger. Wall thickness decreased in residential buildings. Fireplaces became more efficient. Eventually, new materials and construction methods allowed interiors to retain heat more effectively. The gradual disappearance of the traditional stone fortress from everyday noble life was therefore not only a military development but an environmental one. People did not simply abandon castles because they were obsolete in battle. They also moved toward structures that were easier to live in, warmer, brighter, and less demanding to maintain. Seen from this perspective, the cold interiors of medieval castles were not an unfortunate side effect. They were the logical outcome of a world in which survival, defense, and durability outweighed the pursuit of comfort. Understanding this helps reframe how we interpret these buildings today. Rather than imagining them as grand homes that happen to be drafty, it is more accurate to see them as defensive machines that people adapted themselves to inhabit. Daily life inside their walls was therefore defined by small, repeated actions: tending fires, hanging fabrics, layering clothing, closing shutters, and gathering close to shared warmth. Comfort was not built into the structure. It was created continuously by the people living within it. The experience of cold within a medieval castle was not uniform across all rooms or all levels of society. Temperature, like space itself, was organized according to hierarchy. The lord's private chambers, though still far from comfortable by modern standards, received more attention, more fuel, and more insulation than the areas occupied by servants, guards, or laborers. Warmth was a managed resource, and like most resources in the medieval world, it flowed along lines of status. The Great Hall, often imagined as the heart of castle life, was paradoxically one of the most difficult spaces to heat. The scale was intentional. A large hall demonstrated power, accommodated gatherings, and allowed the lord to display authority before retainers and visitors. Yet the very size that made it politically useful made it thermally inefficient. Fires burned, but heat rose quickly into the open volume above. Those seated nearest the hearth experienced warmth on their faces, while their backs remained chilled by circulating drafts. Air movement inside castles was rarely gentle. Small openings, arrow slits, imperfect shutters, and gaps in timber framing allowed constant exchanges between interior and exterior air. Even when windows were covered with oiled cloth or wooden panels, they were not sealed. Wind found its way through joints in stone and wood, creating slow but persistent currents. These drafts were often most noticeable at floor level, where people's feet and legs remained cold despite nearby fire. Because of this, benches and seating platforms were sometimes raised slightly above the stone floor. The elevation was modest, yet it reduced direct contact with the cold surface beneath. Footstools, furs, and layered textiles served the same purpose. Comfort was built not through structural insulation, but through accumulated layers placed between the body and the environment. Lighting also influenced the perception of warmth. Medieval interiors relied heavily on firelight, candles, and occasionally oil lamps. Firelight produces not only illumination but a psychological sense of heat. In dim spaces, the glow of embers created a visual association with warmth even when the actual air temperature remained low. This subtle effect shaped how people gathered, positioning themselves within the circle of light as much as within the circle of heat. Seasonal rhythms further defined interior life. During colder months, daily activity compressed into fewer rooms that could realistically be maintained with active fires. Peripheral spaces fell into relative disuse. Storage chambers, secondary corridors, and upper defensive levels might remain unheated for long stretches. In this way, the lived footprint of the castle expanded and contracted with the seasons, much like a living organism conserving energy. Fuel itself was a constant logistical concern. Wood had to be cut, transported, dried, and stored in significant quantities. In regions where forests were managed carefully, access to fuel was both an economic and political matter. A large castle required an ongoing supply simply to maintain minimal comfort in key rooms. The labor involved: cutting timber, carrying logs, cleaning ash, was continuous and largely invisible in romanticized portrayals of castle life. Smoke management presented another challenge. Early fireplaces and open hearths did not always draw efficiently. Before the widespread refinement of chimney design, smoke could accumulate within rooms, especially when wind conditions shifted. Even with chimneys, downdrafts sometimes pushed smoke back into interior spaces. The smell of wood smoke, therefore, was a persistent feature of castle environments, settling into fabrics, hair, and woodwork. Over time, improvements in chimney construction began to change interior conditions. Taller flues and better draft control allowed fires to burn more steadily and reduced indoor smoke. This did not make castles warm in the modern sense, but it did make heated rooms more usable for longer periods. Architectural evolution often moved slowly, yet even small improvements in airflow could noticeably affect daily comfort. Floors remained a significant source of cold. Stone conducts temperature from the ground upward, and in damp climates that cold was compounded by moisture. Coverings such as rushes, reeds, or woven mats created a thin, insulating layer. These materials also absorbed spills and debris, which meant they required periodic replacement. The floor, like the fire, demanded ongoing attention simply to maintain a tolerable environment. Water introduced another dimension to interior chill. Many castles were positioned near rivers or built atop elevated ground where wind exposure was high. Moisture carried through the air settled on cool stone surfaces. In winter, this could produce a clammy sensation even when temperatures were not severely low. Fabrics, especially wool, helped buffer against this dampness, which is one reason wool remained a dominant textile across much of medieval Europe. Bathing practices were shaped partly by these environmental realities. Heating large volumes of water required significant fuel, and exposure to cold air afterward could be uncomfortable or even risky. As a result, full immersion bathing was less frequent than in some earlier Roman traditions. Instead, partial washing, warming near fires, and the use of heated cloths were more practical within the thermal limits of castle interiors. Food preparation provided one of the few reliably warm zones within the complex. Kitchens contained large hearths or ovens that generated sustained heat. For workers assigned there, the environment could be comparatively comfortable, though also physically demanding. The contrast between the warmth of the kitchen and the chill of adjacent corridors was often stark, reinforcing how uneven temperature distribution was throughout the structure. Sound, too, behaved differently in cold stone spaces. Hard surfaces reflected noise, allowing conversations, footsteps, and the movement of tools to travel farther than they would in fabric-lined modern rooms. When tapestries and hangings were added, they softened not only drafts but acoustics. This dual function, thermal and auditory, made textiles an essential component of making vast interiors feel more habitable. As evening approached, routines shifted toward conserving heat. Shutters were closed, curtains drawn, and fires consolidated into the rooms most likely to be used. Movement decreased, and activities that required fine motor work or writing were often positioned close to the best light and warmth available. Night did not simply bring darkness. It brought a measurable drop in interior temperature that shaped behavior. Beds became carefully managed microenvironments. Thick mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers provided insulation from below, while layered blankets trapped heat above. In wealthier settings, warming pans, metal containers filled with embers, were sometimes passed between sheets before sleep. The goal was not luxury, but the creation of a brief pocket of retained warmth sufficient to make rest possible. Despite these efforts, waking to a cold room was common. Fires rarely burned unattended through the entire night due to fuel limits and safety concerns. Morning routines often began with rekindling embers, coaxing flame from what remained. The first warmth of the day was therefore gradual, earned through repeated, practiced motions rather than delivered instantly. These patterns reveal that life inside a castle was governed less by dramatic events than by quiet, repetitive maintenance. Heat had to be gathered, protected, and rebuilt day after day. The architecture did not eliminate environmental hardship. It required inhabitants to develop habits that worked with the material reality of stone, air, and season. In this sense, castles functioned as partnerships between structure and behavior. The building provided defense and permanence, while the people within supplied the continuous labor needed to make the space livable. Warmth was never assumed. It was negotiated, preserved in small zones, and shared among those who occupied them. Over longer stretches of time, the relationship between castle architecture and interior climate began to influence not only daily routines but also expectations about what a residence should provide. As generations lived within these stone environments, habits formed that treated cold as a normal condition rather than an exceptional hardship. This normalization shaped everything from furniture design to patterns of movement within rooms. Furniture in medieval castles was rarely heavy for its own sake. Many pieces were intentionally movable. Tables could be disassembled, benches repositioned, and screens shifted to redirect drafts. This flexibility allowed inhabitants to adapt interior arrangements according to season, time of day, or wind direction. In colder periods, furniture clustered more tightly around hearths, reducing the volume of space that needed to feel habitable. The room itself remained large, but the lived area within it contracted into a warmer core. Wood played an important role in moderating the severity of stone. Where possible, walls were lined with wooden paneling, particularly in later medieval residences. Wood does not conduct cold as aggressively as stone, and even a thin layer could reduce the immediate chill felt by someone seated nearby. Paneling also helped stabilize interior humidity, protecting fabrics and stored goods from persistent dampness. Doors were another significant point of heat loss. Large castle doors, built for security, were thick but not airtight. Gaps around frames allowed cold air to enter slowly but continuously. To counter this, secondary barriers such as hanging cloths or internal screens were often placed just inside entrances. These acted as primitive airlocks, interrupting the direct path of drafts and slightly improving temperature stability in occupied spaces. Corridors, where they existed, were frequently among the coldest areas in the structure. Their purpose was movement rather than habitation, and they rarely contained dedicated heat sources. Passing from one room to another could therefore mean moving through noticeably colder air. This reinforced the importance of layered clothing even indoors, as comfort could change within a few steps. The sensory experience of these transitions was likely familiar to inhabitants. Warmth near a fire, a brief chill in a passage, then partial warmth again in a smaller chamber. Daily life unfolded through a sequence of microclimates. Rather than expecting uniform conditions, people anticipated variation and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Windows evolved slowly over the medieval period, and their development had direct consequences for interior warmth. Early castles relied on narrow openings with shutters. Later, the introduction of glass, initially small panes set into lead frameworks, allowed more light while still limiting wind. Even then, glass was expensive and not always perfectly fitted. Many windows combined glass in upper sections with wooden shutters below, balancing illumination with protection from drafts. Light itself carried practical value beyond visibility. Sunlight entering through south-facing openings could provide modest passive warmth during daylight hours. Rooms positioned to capture this light became more desirable for daytime activities, especially in colder seasons. Architectural orientation, therefore, influenced how different parts of a castle were used throughout the day. Color and material choices also affected perceived temperature. darker woods, deep-colored textiles, and the warm tones of firelight created interiors that felt psychologically warmer than bare gray stone. While these choices were often driven by status and aesthetics, they also softened the starkness of the environment. A hall lined with tapestries did not merely display wealth. It reduced the visual and thermal severity of exposed masonry. Storage practices were shaped by the same environmental pressures. Food, fabrics, and documents had to be protected from both cold and damp. Chests elevated on short legs kept contents away from cold floors. Shelving built into interior walls took advantage of slightly more stable temperatures away from exterior exposure. Even the placement of pantries and storerooms reflected an understanding of which parts of the structure remained coolest or driest across the year. Animals, too, influenced interior warmth in subtle ways. In some castle complexes, certain domestic animals were housed in adjacent lower levels or enclosed courtyards. Their body heat, while modest, contributed to the overall thermal environment of connected spaces. More importantly, their presence reinforced the idea that medieval living arrangements were integrated systems rather than strictly separated zones as in many modern buildings. Illness patterns were sometimes affected by these conditions. Persistent dampness and cold could aggravate respiratory discomfort, particularly during winter months. While medieval people did not understand germ theory, they recognized that certain rooms felt healthier than others, typically those that were drier, brighter, and easier to keep warm. Preference for such spaces gradually influenced later residential design beyond purely defensive needs. Written records from later medieval households occasionally reference the movement of tapestries, the repair of shutters, or the allocation of extra fuel to specific chambers during severe weather. These small administrative details reveal how actively temperature was managed. Warmth was not left to chance. It was planned, rationed, and adjusted in response to changing conditions. Over the 15th century and into the early modern period, a noticeable shift occurred in elite residences across parts of England and France. Great halls began to lose their role as the primary living space, replaced by suites of smaller rooms intended for more private use. This transition reflected social changes, but it also aligned with the practical advantage of heating smaller volumes of air. Comfort, while still secondary to status, was gaining importance. Fireplace design improved alongside this shift. More efficient hearth shapes, better chimney drafting, and the use of iron firebacks helped reflect heat into rooms rather than allowing it to dissipate upward. These incremental innovations did not transform castles into warm environments, but they marked a gradual movement toward interiors that required less constant effort to maintain. Despite these changes, the fundamental material reality of thick stone walls remained. Even improved fireplaces could not fully overcome the thermal inertia of massive masonry. What changed instead was the expectation of where and how people lived within the larger structure. Portions of older castles were sometimes abandoned or repurposed, while newer residential wings incorporated design features intended to moderate temperature more effectively. This evolution illustrates that architecture is rarely static in its purpose. Buildings that begin as instruments of defense can, over time, become frameworks that must accommodate shifting definitions of comfort, privacy, and daily routine. In medieval castles, the slow negotiation between stone and human need produced a layered environment, one where warmth existed not as a constant condition, but as something created in pockets through design, material, and habit. By the late medieval period, the experience of cold had become an accepted background to elite life, yet it was also a quiet force pushing architectural change. As alternatives emerged, manor houses with larger windows, improved glazing, and less emphasis on fortification, the appeal of purely defensive stone residences diminished. People did not abandon castles overnight, but they increasingly favored spaces where heat could be retained with less continuous labor. Seen across centuries, the cold interiors of castles were not merely an inconvenience. They were a persistent environmental pressure that shaped technology, room layout, social behavior, and ultimately the transition toward more comfortable forms of residence. The stones remained the same, but the ways people chose to live among them continued to adapt, guided by the simple, enduring desire to create warmth within walls that were never designed to provide it. As the medieval period moved gradually toward the early modern era, the meaning of residence itself began to shift in subtle but important ways. Castles had long been statements of authority, positioned to dominate landscapes and deter attack. Yet, as political structures stabilized in many regions of Western Europe, the need for constant defensive readiness lessened. When the threat of siege became less immediate, the toleration for persistent indoor cold also began, slowly, to decline. This did not happen through a single decision or moment of reform. Rather, it emerged through generations of incremental preference. Nobles who had experienced comparatively warmer lodgings during travel, whether in ecclesiastical buildings, urban residences, or newer manor houses, became more aware that stone fortresses were not the only possible way to live. Comfort, once considered secondary, began to carry quiet, persuasive power. One of the clearest architectural responses was the growing popularity of the manor house. Unlike the traditional castle, the manor prioritized residence first and defense second. Walls were thinner, windows were larger, and interior layouts favored sequences of smaller rooms. These changes reduced the volume of air that needed to be warmed and allowed sunlight to penetrate deeper into living spaces. Even modest increases in daylight could meaningfully affect both temperature and mood within a room. Glass production also improved gradually during this period. While still expensive, larger and more consistent panes became available to wealthier households. Glazed windows reduced direct drafts far more effectively than shutters alone. Though far from airtight by modern standards, they marked a significant step toward interiors that could retain heat for longer periods after a fire had been lit. Roofs and ceilings evolved as well. In earlier great halls, open rafters allowed heat to rise and disperse into unused upper space. Later designs introduced lower ceilings or added intermediate floors, effectively trapping warmth closer to occupied areas. This architectural adjustment did not require new materials, only a different prioritization of how interior volume should be used. The redistribution of space also changed patterns of social interaction. Instead of large communal halls serving as the center of nearly all activity, smaller chambers encouraged more private forms of gathering. From a thermal perspective, these rooms were easier to maintain at a tolerable temperature with a single hearth. From a social perspective, they supported quieter, more controlled environments that aligned with evolving expectations of elite behavior. Textiles remained essential even as buildings improved. Thick curtains continued to be drawn across windows and doorways during colder months. Wall hangings persisted not only as decoration but as functional insulation. The difference was that these measures now supplemented architecture that was beginning, slowly, to cooperate with the goal of warmth rather than resist it. Fuel efficiency became a growing concern as well. Large, open hearths consumed significant amounts of wood without converting most of that energy into sustained room heat. Smaller, more contained fireplaces, sometimes fitted with iron grates, allowed fires to burn hotter and more consistently. This reduced the total quantity of fuel required to maintain comfort in frequently used spaces. In regions where timber resources were under pressure, this efficiency carried economic importance. Managing woodland for long-term supply meant balancing construction needs, shipbuilding, and daily heating demands. Improvements in how heat was generated and retained therefore had consequences beyond personal comfort. They affected estate management and regional resource planning. Servant labor, which had long compensated for architectural inefficiency, also began to shift in emphasis. Instead of spending much of the day transporting fuel and maintaining multiple large fires, household staff in newer residences could focus more on specialized domestic roles. The environment still required attention, but less constant intervention was needed simply to keep primary rooms usable. Despite these changes, many older castles remained in use, particularly where their symbolic value was tied to lineage and authority. In such places, adaptations were often layered onto existing structures. Wooden paneling might be added to previously bare stone walls. Additional chimneys could be inserted. Windows might be enlarged where structural limits allowed. The result was a hybrid environment, part fortress, part evolving residence. These modifications reveal that medieval and early modern people were not indifferent to comfort. They worked within the constraints of inherited buildings, gradually reshaping them as technology, wealth, and expectations permitted. The cold was never fully eliminated, but it was increasingly managed through design rather than solely through behavior. Climate variability also played a role. Periods associated with the later phases of what historians sometimes describe as the Little Ice Age brought cooler average temperatures across parts of Europe. In such conditions, the limitations of stone interiors became even more apparent. Extended damp and chill reinforced the advantages of buildings that could retain heat more effectively. Environmental pressure, once again, encouraged architectural adaptation. Written accounts from estate records occasionally note expenditures on glazing, additional hearth construction, or the purchase of heavier fabrics. These entries are practical rather than dramatic, yet they document a steady investment in making interiors more habitable. Over decades, such investments accumulated into noticeable shifts in living standards for those who could afford them. The psychological experience of home also evolved alongside these material changes. A residence that could maintain a relatively stable temperature allowed for longer periods of sedentary activity, reading, writing, administrative work, without the constant distraction of physical discomfort. As literacy and record-keeping expanded among elites, environments that supported sustained concentration became more desirable. This relationship between temperature and attention is subtle but significant. Warmth reduces the body's need to prioritize immediate physical survival, freeing cognitive energy for planning, governance, and cultural pursuits. In this way, improvements in interior climate contributed indirectly to broader transformations in how elite households functioned on a daily basis. By the 17th century, in many parts of England and France, the fully fortified castle had largely given way to residences that balanced prestige with practicality. Towers and battlements might remain as visual symbols, but the lived spaces within were increasingly shaped by the expectation that a home should protect not only from enemies, but also from the elements. Looking back across the medieval centuries, the persistent cold of stone castles can be understood as both a constraint and a catalyst. It constrained daily comfort, limited how spaces were used, and required continuous labor to manage. At the same time, it quietly encouraged innovation, first in textiles and habit, then in fireplace design, window construction, room layout, and eventually in the very concept of what a noble residence should be. The stones themselves did not change their nature. Thick masonry still absorbed and held the surrounding climate. What changed was the willingness of those who lived among those walls to accept that condition as inevitable. As alternatives appeared, even gradual improvements revealed that permanence did not have to mean enduring discomfort. In this long transition, the medieval castle stands as a reminder that architecture reflects priorities. When defense dominated, cold was tolerated. When stability allowed attention to shift toward daily life, warmth became worth pursuing. The history of these interiors is therefore not only about buildings, but about the slow rebalancing of human needs, from survival behind walls to the quieter expectation that those walls should also provide a measure of enduring comfort. This gradual rebalancing did not erase the cultural meaning of castles, even as their practical role diminished. Long after many ceased to function as primary residences, they continued to shape how later generations imagined authority, heritage, and continuity. Yet the lived experience within their walls, defined for centuries by cold stone, drifting smoke, and carefully guarded pockets of warmth, remained embedded in the physical fabric of the structures themselves. When later occupants or caretakers entered older halls that had once hosted daily activity, they often encountered spaces that felt oversized for their new purposes. Without the constant presence of large households, servants, and sustained fires, these interiors reverted quickly to their natural thermal state. The same mass that once symbolized endurance now emphasized emptiness. A hall without movement or flame became noticeably colder, its acoustics sharper, its air heavier with stillness. This tendency reveals something essential about how medieval castles functioned at their peak. They were never passive shelters. Their habitability depended on continuous human presence, on footsteps that stirred air, fires that dried dampness, textiles that interrupted drafts, and routines that redistributed warmth from one zone to another. Remove those rhythms, and the building returned to a condition closer to its raw material reality. Archaeological studies of surviving castles often show patterns of soot accumulation, hearth placement, and later modifications that reflect centuries of adaptation. Layers of smoke residue on stone, for example, can indicate where fires burned most consistently. Changes in floor levels or the insertion of wooden partitions reveal attempts to create smaller, more manageable interior climates. These physical traces function as quiet records of how people negotiated with the environment over long spans of time. Even the wear on thresholds and steps tells part of this story. Paths most frequently traveled were often those that connected the warmest or most active spaces: kitchens, primary chambers, and main hearths. Movement patterns, preserved in stone through erosion, map the routes by which inhabitants circulated between pockets of relative comfort. In this way, temperature influenced not only where people sat, but where they walked. The sensory landscape of a fully inhabited castle would have been distinct from modern expectations of indoor life. The air carried a mixture of wood smoke, heated metal, damp fabric, and cooked food. Surfaces varied from the rough chill of exposed masonry to the softer, warmer feel of wool, fur, or polished wood. Sound echoed differently depending on how many textiles were in place and how many people occupied the room. Warmth was experienced not as a steady background condition, but as something that intensified and faded across short distances. These variations shaped social behavior in subtle ways. Proximity to the hearth often correlated with status during gatherings, as those seated closest enjoyed the most reliable warmth. Positions farther from the fire were not merely symbolic. They were physically less comfortable. Over time, etiquette and spatial hierarchy intertwined with environmental gradients, reinforcing social order through everyday experience. Children growing up in such settings would have learned early how to read these microclimates. Knowing which corner of a chamber stayed least drafty, or how to angle a stool to catch reflected heat from a fireback, were practical skills rather than curiosities. Domestic knowledge included an intuitive understanding of how stone, wood, air, and flame interacted throughout the day. Written descriptions from later observers sometimes express surprise at how resilient inhabitants appeared in the face of these conditions. Yet resilience was less about endurance in a heroic sense and more about familiarity. When a cool room is the norm from childhood onward, the body and expectations adjust accordingly. Comfort becomes relative rather than absolute. At the same time, aspirations for improved living conditions never fully disappeared. Inventories and household accounts occasionally mention investments in thicker hangings, additional bedding, or repairs intended to reduce drafts. These incremental efforts suggest that while cold was accepted, it was never entirely welcomed. The desire for warmth persisted as a quiet, practical priority. As centuries passed and newer residences offered brighter, warmer interiors, the older castles increasingly shifted towards ceremonial, administrative, or symbolic roles. Some became regional centers for governance rather than daily domestic life. Others were maintained primarily as seats of lineage, visited seasonally rather than inhabited year-round. Reduced occupancy meant fewer active fires, which in turn allowed interiors to grow colder still, accelerating the perception that these structures belonged to an earlier way of living. In regions where castles were eventually abandoned or only partially maintained, nature began to reassert itself within the walls. Moisture penetrated unchecked, vegetation took root in joints between stones, and interior spaces experienced the full range of external temperature. The buildings that had once moderated the outside world now mirrored it more directly, their internal climates nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape. Modern conservation efforts often confront this same challenge from a different perspective. Preserving historic stone structures without fundamentally altering their character requires careful management of moisture, airflow, and temperature. Introducing modern heating indiscriminately can damage materials or accelerate decay. As a result, many preserved castles remain intentionally cool, offering visitors a closer approximation of the environmental conditions their original inhabitants navigated daily. For contemporary audiences accustomed to insulated walls and controlled climates, stepping into such spaces can be unexpectedly revealing. The immediate sensation of chill, even on a mild day, provides a physical insight that written descriptions alone cannot fully convey. It becomes easier to understand why fires, textiles, and layered clothing were not luxuries but necessities. This embodied experience also reframes the visual grandeur often associated with castles. High ceilings, expansive halls, and vast stone surfaces may appear impressive, yet they simultaneously represent volumes that were difficult to warm. The architecture communicates power, but it also silently records the cost of prioritizing defense and permanence over comfort. In examining these environments across time, it becomes clear that the cold of medieval castles was never a single problem with a single solution. It was a constant condition met through many small responses: architectural adjustments, material choices, daily routines, and social organization. Each generation inherited walls designed for one set of priorities and adapted them, as best they could, to another. Ultimately, the history of temperature inside these structures is a history of negotiation between human need and material constraint. Stone offered security and longevity, but demanded patience and labor in return. Warmth could be created but rarely stored for long. Comfort existed, but in limited zones shaped by fire, fabric, and proximity. Seen in this light, medieval castles were not simply cold places where people happened to live. They were complex environments that required continuous cooperation between building and inhabitant. The people who moved through their corridors understood, often without formal explanation, that survival and stability depended on managing small details. Closing a shutter before dusk, feeding a hearth at the right moment, drawing a curtain to hold a pocket of heat through the night. These quiet actions, repeated across countless evenings and winters, formed the true rhythm of life within stone walls. Long after banners faded and political struggles passed, it was this steady, practical effort, the daily work of making warmth where none was guaranteed, that defined what it meant to inhabit a medieval castle. In considering the long arc of these lived experiences, it becomes apparent that temperature inside medieval castles was not merely a background condition but a force that quietly shaped decisions at every level of household life. From the placement of a chair to the scheduling of communal activities, warmth influenced how time and space were organized. The environment did not dictate every choice, yet it consistently narrowed the range of what felt practical. Morning routines, for example, often began with a deliberate reactivation of spaces that had cooled overnight. Embers preserved beneath ash might be coaxed back into flame, while shutters were opened cautiously to admit light without inviting excessive draft. The first movements of the day were therefore oriented toward restoring a workable climate before other tasks could proceed comfortably. In this way, the management of heat framed the transition from night to day. Work that required steady hands. Writing accounts, repairing fine textiles, preparing delicate food, was commonly positioned as close as possible to reliable heat sources. Cold stiffens fingers and slows precise motion, a reality as true then as now. By clustering such activities near hearths or within smaller chambers, households increased efficiency without altering the underlying structure of the building. The environment shaped productivity in quiet, practical ways. Seasonal daylight further affected how warmth was used. In winter, the limited hours of sun meant that any natural light, and the modest heat it carried, was valuable. Rooms oriented toward the south or west became preferred locations for daytime gatherings. As the sun moved, so too might people, following both illumination and slight changes in temperature across the interior landscape. The castle, though made of fixed stone, hosted patterns of movement that shifted with the sky. Meal times also intersected with thermal management. Large kitchens generated sustained heat from ovens and boiling cauldrons, making them comparatively comfortable during active preparation. Yet once cooking slowed, adjacent spaces cooled quickly. Serving food in the Great Hall required transporting warmth only in the form of hot dishes and drink, not in the ambient air. The contrast between the kitchen's heat and the hall's chill would have been a familiar sensation repeated daily. Utensils and tableware responded to temperature as well. Metal objects, when left in cold rooms, became unpleasant to handle. Wooden bowls, cups, and spoons were not only easier to produce but more comfortable to hold in low temperatures. Such material choices, often interpreted purely as economic, also carried subtle ergonomic advantages within cool interiors. Writing materials reveal a similar adaptation. Ink could thicken in colder conditions, and wax used for seals became less pliable. Documents were therefore often prepared near reliable heat, not only for comfort but to ensure materials behaved as expected. The physical properties of everyday substances, ink, wax, glue, were all sensitive to temperature, reinforcing the need to concentrate administrative work within warmer zones. Leisure, too, followed the geography of heat. Storytelling, music, and quiet conversation tended to gather where both light and warmth were sufficient to sustain attention. In expansive halls, this often meant forming smaller circles within the larger space, defined not by walls but by the reach of firelight. Beyond that radius, the room existed but felt less inhabited. Over years and decades, such patterns created an internal map understood by everyone in the household. Certain corners were known to be drafty during northern winds. Particular doorways required extra hangings in midwinter. Specific chambers retained warmth longer after sunset. This knowledge was rarely written down. It was learned through repetition and passed along through instruction and observation. Maintenance cycles reinforced this shared awareness. Tapestries needed periodic repositioning to prevent moisture buildup behind them. Rushes on floors were replaced as they became damp or compacted. Chimneys required clearing to maintain proper draw. Each task, though routine, contributed incrementally to preserving pockets of livable warmth within the larger mass of stone. Festive occasions highlighted both the possibilities and limits of these environments. When many fires were lit simultaneously and rooms filled with people, interiors could become noticeably warmer for a time. Body heat, increased cooking, and extended illumination combined to shift the atmosphere. Yet once the gathering ended and fires were allowed to diminish, the underlying chill returned, reminding inhabitants that such warmth was temporary and resource-intensive. Travelers and guests sometimes remarked on these contrasts. Arriving from the open road, a castle's interior could feel sheltered yet still cool compared to smaller timber houses that retained heat more readily. The impression was not necessarily of discomfort alone, but of a space whose priorities were visibly different. Strength and endurance first, ease of living second. As administrative and legal functions expanded in later centuries, some castles hosted records, treasuries, and archives that required protection from moisture as much as from theft. Rooms selected for such purposes were often those with the most stable internal conditions, neither the coldest nor the dampest. The preservation of parchment and bindings depended on avoiding extremes, further encouraging attention to microclimates within the structure. The gradual introduction of carpets in certain elite settings provided another modest buffer against cold floors. While expensive and not universal, they demonstrated a continued search for materials that could soften the interaction between body and building. Each additional layer, wood paneling, heavy drapery, woven covering, represented an incremental step toward interiors shaped as much by comfort as by defense. Even with these adaptations, the fundamental rhythm persisted. Warmth gathered near sources, dispersed into stone, and had to be rebuilt. This cycle defined the tempo of daily life. It encouraged proximity, shared spaces, and coordinated routines centered on maintaining a few reliably usable rooms rather than attempting to condition the entire structure. In reflecting on these patterns, it becomes clear that medieval castles were environments that rewarded attentiveness. Small oversights, a shutter left ajar, a neglected ember, a curtain not drawn at dusk, could noticeably affect the comfort of a space for hours afterward. Conversely, careful timing and consistent habits produced disproportionately positive results, preserving warmth longer than the architecture alone would allow. Such sensitivity to environment fostered a practical mindset oriented toward stewardship rather than control. Inhabitants did not expect the building to provide stable conditions automatically. Instead, they participated continuously in shaping those conditions through action. The castle was enduring, but livability within it was always provisional, maintained through daily effort. Across generations, this partnership between people and stone created a distinctive form of domestic life, one defined not by constant ease, but by predictable cycles and shared responsibility. Warmth was experienced as something earned, protected, and distributed according to need and status. The structure stood as a symbol of permanence, while the routines within it revealed the ongoing work required to make permanence habitable. In the end, the cold of medieval castles was neither an anomaly nor a simple hardship. It was an ever-present context that guided architecture, behavior, material culture, and social organization. Understanding this context allows the buildings to be seen not merely as dramatic relics on the landscape, but as lived spaces shaped by countless small decisions, each one aimed at holding a little warmth inside walls that were never meant to keep it there for long. Over very long spans of occupation, these repeated adjustments accumulated into traditions that were rarely written but widely understood. Households developed customary ways of arranging space in autumn, preparing fabrics before the onset of winter, and shifting activity back toward brighter rooms as spring returned. The building itself did not change from season to season, yet the manner in which it was used did, producing a yearly rhythm that echoed the agricultural calendar beyond the walls. This rhythm influenced how time was perceived indoors. In colder months, mornings unfolded more slowly as rooms were brought back to life with rekindled fires. Evenings tended to close earlier, not only because of darkness but because maintaining multiple heated spaces demanded additional fuel and labor. The practical limits of warmth encouraged consolidation. Fewer rooms, fewer active hearths, more shared presence in the same areas. Winter life, therefore, was often more concentrated, both physically and socially. By contrast, milder seasons allowed activity to disperse. Doors could remain open longer, upper levels were used more frequently, and circulation through corridors felt less abrupt. The castle seemed larger when temperature was less restrictive. What appeared architecturally constant revealed itself, across the year, to be an environment whose usable size expanded and contracted with climate. Craft production within castle complexes also adapted to these cycles. Tasks involving materials sensitive to moisture, such as certain glues, dyes, or fine woodworking, were scheduled for times when conditions were more stable. Workshops positioned within thicker interior zones benefited from slightly moderated temperatures, demonstrating an intuitive awareness of where environmental fluctuations were least severe. Skilled labor was therefore guided not only by availability of tools and patrons, but by the subtle geography of heat and damp. Storage of textiles required particular care. Wool and linen could absorb moisture from cool air, leading to odor or deterioration if left in poorly ventilated spaces. Chests were opened periodically to air contents near controlled warmth, then closed again to protect against drafts. This cycle of airing and storing formed part of routine stewardship, ensuring that the very materials used to create comfort did not degrade under the same conditions they were meant to mitigate. Metal objects presented a different challenge. In persistently cool interiors, condensation could form on colder surfaces, encouraging corrosion. Tools, weapons, and household fittings were therefore cleaned and oiled with regularity. Maintenance was not merely about readiness or appearance. It was a response to the environment's slow, continuous pressure on materials. The presence of chapels within many castles introduced another dimension to interior climate. These sacred spaces, often built with high vaults and limited heating, were among the coolest rooms in the complex. Religious services conducted their required stillness despite the chill, shaping posture, clothing choices, and duration of gatherings. The experience of devotion was thus intertwined with physical sensation, reinforcing a culture accustomed to composure in less than comfortable surroundings. Education and instruction, when they occurred within noble households, typically took place in smaller chambers where sustained attention was possible. Warmer, quieter rooms reduced distraction and protected writing materials. Over time, the association between learning and enclosed, better controlled spaces contributed to broader architectural trends that favored studies, libraries, and private offices in later residences. Guests moving between different estates would have noticed subtle variations in how effectively warmth was managed. Some households invested more heavily in textiles, others in improved hearth construction, and still others in architectural alterations such as added paneling. Reputation could be influenced by these choices. A residence known for being comparatively comfortable during winter months offered a form of hospitality that extended beyond food and ceremony. Despite incremental improvements, extremes of weather still tested every strategy. Prolonged cold spells could exhaust stored fuel more quickly than anticipated. In such times, priorities narrowed to preserving warmth in essential chambers while allowing less critical areas to fall into near dormancy. The castle's many rooms were an advantage in defense, but in severe winter they became a liability, each additional space representing volume that could not realistically be heated. These pressures encouraged careful record-keeping in well-managed estates. Accounts tracked fuel consumption, repairs to chimneys, and the replacement of worn hangings. Over years, such records revealed patterns: how much wood was required for a typical winter, which rooms demanded frequent maintenance, where drafts were most persistent. Knowledge accumulated not as theory, but as practical memory embedded in administrative routine. Sound and silence also shifted with temperature. Cold, still air in large stone chambers could carry faint noises across surprising distances, while rooms thick with textiles and active fires absorbed them. Nighttime, when activity ceased and fires burned low, often brought a deeper quiet punctuated only by the occasional movement of wind through narrow openings. These acoustic changes reinforced the sense that the building itself participated in the daily cycle of warming and cooling. For those responsible for security, maintaining watch in colder upper levels or along exposed walls required endurance as much as vigilance. Guard posts were positioned for visibility, not comfort. Cloaks, furs, and periodic movement helped sustain alertness. Here again, architecture prioritized defense, and human habit compensated for environmental strain. Over generations, the cumulative effect of these experiences influenced cultural expectations about what constituted a good room. Desirable spaces were those that balanced light, dryness, and the ability to retain heat for longer after a fire. Such preferences gradually shaped the design of newer wings and entirely new residences. Without abandoning the symbolic language of stone, builders sought proportions and materials that moderated its harsher qualities. When later observers, antiquarians, travelers, or early historians recorded impressions of ancient castles, they often remarked on the chill even in fair weather. Their reactions highlight how much expectations had shifted by their own time. What earlier inhabitants accepted as ordinary now felt noteworthy. The same walls that once represented security began to signify austerity. In the present day, restored castles frequently present interiors that appear orderly and composed, yet the underlying thermal character remains detectable. Even with modern interventions kept discreet, visitors sensed the coolness of thick masonry and the scale of spaces once difficult to warm. This continuity offers a rare physical link across centuries, allowing contemporary bodies to register, however briefly, the environmental conditions that shaped medieval routine. Seen in this broader perspective, the story of cold within castle walls is less about discomfort alone and more about adaptation sustained over time. People did not passively endure their surroundings. They developed layered responses, architectural, material, and behavioral, that made life within stone not luxurious, but workable. Each generation refined these responses, passing forward practical knowledge about how to coax livability from structures built for endurance above all else. The enduring lesson is quiet but clear. Buildings express priorities and priorities evolve. When protection and permanence dominated, interiors remained cool and demanding. As stability increased and daily life gained greater emphasis, efforts to retain warmth became more deliberate and more successful. Through this gradual shift, the medieval castle stands not only as a monument of defense, but as a record of how human needs, persistent, patient, and pragmatic, slowly reshape even the most uncompromising of walls. As these patterns of adaptation continued into later centuries, the memory of how to live within cold stone did not disappear immediately. Instead, it lingered as a kind of inherited knowledge, practices passed from older servants to younger ones, from one generation of household officers to the next. Even as some residences grew warmer and more refined, the habits formed in earlier, harsher interiors remained part of domestic culture. Instructions about when to close shutters, how to bank a fire so embers would survive the night, or where to hang thicker drapery during a northern wind were rarely written as formal doctrine. They were demonstrated through repetition. A new attendant learned by observing which rooms were prepared first in the evening, which hearths were allowed to die down, and which were kept alive at all costs. In this way, environmental management functioned as a practical apprenticeship embedded within everyday service. The architecture itself often guided these routines. Hearths positioned along interior walls retained warmth slightly longer than those exposed to outer masonry. Niches built into thicker sections of stone provided marginally more stable conditions for storing items sensitive to damp. Window seats, sometimes carved deep into walls, could be surprisingly cold unless lined with cushions or fur. Each feature suggested, through experience, how it should be used. Over time, some castles accumulated layers of modification that revealed changing attitudes toward comfort. A wall originally left bare might later receive wooden paneling, then be covered in textile hangings, and eventually be subdivided by a partition to create a smaller chamber. These additions were not grand redesigns, but incremental decisions made by successive occupants responding to the same persistent chill. In estates where resources allowed, specialized rooms began to appear with more defined purposes, withdrawal chambers for private conversation, studies for reading, and accounting rooms for estate management. Their smaller scale made them easier to warm, and their functions required sustained attention that large, drafty halls could not easily support. Privacy and temperature control thus advanced together, each reinforcing the value of the other. Travel between residences further accelerated the spread of such preferences. Nobles and their households moved seasonally, comparing conditions across different properties. When a particular manor proved more comfortable in winter, perhaps due to better glazing, improved chimneys, or favorable orientation, its features were noted and sometimes imitated elsewhere. Architectural ideas circulated not only through craftsmen but through lived comparison. At the same time, symbolism continued to anchor many families to older strongholds. Ancestral castles carried meaning that newer houses could not immediately replace. As a result, some complexes evolved into mixed environments. Ceremonial halls preserved for tradition, while adjacent wings provided more habitable quarters. The contrast between these areas made the environmental differences especially apparent. One space impressive but austere, the other modest but comparatively warm. Economic shifts also influenced how extensively interiors could be modified. Periods of prosperity allowed investment in additional fireplaces, higher quality glass, or imported textiles with denser weaves. During leaner times, maintenance focused on preserving existing measures, repairing shutters, reusing serviceable hangings, and rationing fuel carefully. The thermal character of a residence could therefore fluctuate with the fortunes of its owners. In regions where urban living grew more attractive, townhouses offered another comparison point. Built with shared walls and denser layouts, they often retained heat more effectively than isolated stone keeps. Merchants and administrators accustomed to these environments sometimes found older castles unnecessarily severe for daily residents. Gradually, expectations about baseline comfort shifted across social groups, not only among the highest nobility. Religious institutions provided yet another reference. Monasteries and cathedrals, though also constructed of stone, developed their own strategies for managing cold. Enclosed cloisters, smaller heated rooms for scriptoria, and schedules that balanced communal gathering with retreat to more protected spaces. Individuals moving between secular and religious settings carried observations with them, contributing to a broader exchange of practical solutions. The language used to describe interiors began to reflect these evolving sensibilities. Terms associated with coziness, shelter, and domestic ease appeared more frequently in household correspondence and estate descriptions. While grandeur remained valued, it was increasingly accompanied by an expectation that principal rooms should be reasonably habitable through the colder months. Technological refinements, though gradual, reinforced this trend. Improvements in glassmaking reduced irregular gaps that once allowed persistent drafts. Iron components within fireplaces helped radiate heat forward rather than losing it up the flue. Better joinery in doors and shutters limited unwanted air movement. None of these changes transformed stone buildings into uniformly warm environments, but together they reduced the constant intensity of the earlier chill. As comfort improved in some areas, tolerance for cold decreased. What one generation considered acceptable, the next might judge unnecessarily harsh. This shift in expectation is a familiar pattern across many aspects of material culture. Once a more comfortable alternative becomes known, older conditions feel less inevitable. In castles, this meant that spaces left unmodified were used less frequently, gradually becoming symbolic rather than practical. By the time many fortifications had fully transitioned into heritage sites or administrative centers, the knowledge required to manage their original living conditions had largely faded from common use. Modern caretakers approached these structures with different goals: preservation, interpretation, and safety, rather than daily habitation. Fires that once defined the rhythm of life were replaced by controlled conservation measures designed to protect stone, wood, and fabric from long-term damage. Yet the buildings still communicate their history through sensation. A cool draft along a corridor, the way sound carries across a vaulted hall, or the lingering smell of aged masonry after rain all hint at the environmental realities earlier occupants negotiated as part of ordinary routine. These cues are subtle, but they bridge centuries by engaging the same human senses. Understanding castles in this way shifts attention from dramatic events to sustained experience. Battles, ceremonies, and political decisions certainly passed through these spaces, but far more hours were spent tending fires, adjusting hangings, sealing gaps, and choosing where to sit for the greatest warmth. The majority of life unfolded in these quiet acts of maintenance. In the broader history of architecture, the medieval castle represents a moment when durability and defense set the primary terms of design. Everything that followed, paneling, glazing, smaller rooms, improved hearths, can be seen as a gradual negotiation with those original priorities. Rather than replacing stone outright, generations worked around its limitations, seeking ways to temper its effects without sacrificing the authority it symbolized. This long negotiation underscores a simple, enduring truth. Environments shape behavior, and behavior, repeated over time, reshapes environments in return. Within castle walls, that exchange was continuous. The structure imposed cold. The inhabitants answered with fire, fabric, and habit. Each winter reaffirmed the partnership. Each modest improvement nudged conditions slightly toward comfort. When viewed across centuries, the story is less about a single solution than about persistence. No innovation fully overcame the thermal nature of thick masonry, yet countless small adjustments made life within those walls sustainable. The legacy of medieval castles, therefore, is not only their silhouette on the horizon, but the record they hold of patient adaptation, of people who learned, season after season, how to create livable warmth inside buildings designed first and foremost to endure. In tracing the final stages of this long transformation, it becomes clear that the decline of castles as primary homes was not an abrupt abandonment, but a gradual redefinition of their purpose. Many remained occupied in some capacity, yet the center of daily life often shifted toward newer structures built within the same estates. These newer residences borrowed the authority of the old stone walls while quietly departing from their environmental limitations. Courtyard ranges, gatehouses converted into lodgings, and adjacent manor houses began to host the routines that once filled the Great Hall. Here, rooms were proportioned with habitation in mind. Ceilings sat lower, windows admitted more light, and fireplaces were positioned to serve specific chambers rather than vast communal spaces. The castle, once the core of domestic activity, increasingly functioned as a ceremonial anchor, a place for formal gatherings, storage, or seasonal use. This shift did not erase the habits formed over centuries of living with cold stone. Instead, those habits informed how new interiors were arranged. Curtains were still drawn at dusk, doors were still managed to control drafts, and fires were still treated as resources to be tended rather than conveniences to be assumed. What changed was the margin of effort required to achieve a similar level of comfort. Warmer buildings reduced the constant urgency that earlier inhabitants had known. Landscape design also began to play a role in moderating environmental exposure. Trees planted as windbreaks, enclosed gardens, and sheltered approaches reduced the direct impact of prevailing winds on residential wings. These interventions did not alter the castle's masonry, but they softened the microclimate around it. Over time, the immediate surroundings of elite residences were shaped not only for display but for practical protection against cold air currents. Inside, the distribution of daily functions became more specialized. Kitchens remained sources of sustained heat, yet dining increasingly occurred in rooms sized to retain warmth more effectively. Administrative work moved into studies designed for quieter, more stable conditions. Sleeping quarters emphasized enclosed beds, thicker mattresses, and improved glazing. Each adjustment reflected a growing expectation that architecture should cooperate with comfort rather than resist it. Fuel management evolved alongside these changes. As fireplaces became more efficient and rooms smaller, the total quantity of wood required to maintain habitable conditions decreased. Estates could allocate resources with greater precision, balancing heating needs against other demands such as construction, ship repair, or market sale of timber. Efficiency, once a secondary concern behind sheer survival through winter, gained economic significance. The sensory character of interiors shifted as well. With less smoke escaping into rooms due to improved flues, fabrics retained fewer odors, and air felt clearer even when fires burned steadily. light entering through better glazing combined with warmer surfaces to create spaces that appeared less austere. Stone did not disappear, but it was increasingly mediated by wood, plaster, and textile layers that interrupted its direct contact with occupants. Visitors in later periods sometimes described older, unmodified sections of castles as impressive yet uncomfortable, while newer wings felt inviting despite being less monumental. This contrast highlights a broader cultural transition. Prestige was no longer measured solely by mass and fortification. Habitability, light, dryness, manageable warmth became part of what defined a refined residence. Education of heirs and household members reflected this new balance. Instruction in estate management included not only defense and governance but also stewardship of living environments, overseeing repairs to glazing, ensuring chimneys were maintained, and planning seasonal preparation of rooms. Comfort became an administrative responsibility rather than an incidental outcome of constant manual effort. Even so, the older knowledge never lost its relevance entirely. Severe winters, supply disruptions, or travel to less improved properties could quickly reintroduce harsher conditions. In such moments, the inherited practices of layering textiles, consolidating activity, and carefully rationing fuel proved their enduring value. The past remained a practical reference, not merely a memory. As centuries progressed, many castles transitioned into symbols preserved for their historical and familial significance. Some were partially dismantled to reuse stone in newer buildings better suited to contemporary expectations. Others were maintained as landmarks, their great halls opened for occasional ceremony rather than daily life. Without the continuous cycle of heating and occupation, interiors often returned to a cooler equilibrium that echoed their medieval state. Modern preservation has tended to respect this equilibrium. Introducing full contemporary climate control into ancient masonry can trap moisture or stress materials. As a result, many conserved castles remain naturally cool, stabilized through ventilation and careful monitoring rather than aggressive heating. Visitors today encounter conditions closer to those once experienced by inhabitants, though without the constant presence of fires that once created islands of warmth. This continuity allows the buildings to function as quiet educational environments. The sensation of cool air against stone, the echo of footsteps across a vaulted chamber, and the filtered light through narrow openings communicate aspects of history that text alone cannot convey. Physical experience bridges the distance between present expectation and past reality. Reflecting on the full trajectory, from fortified stronghold to adapted residence to preserved monument, reveals that the code of medieval castles was never merely a technical flaw. It was the predictable result of priorities rooted in security, visibility, and endurance. When those priorities shifted, architecture responded, sometimes slowly, sometimes through layered modification, but always in dialogue with human need. The enduring image of the castle, therefore, contains two intertwined truths. From a distance, it represents stability, stone set firmly against time and conflict. Up close, it records centuries of negotiation as inhabitants sought to carve out livable warmth within that stability. Every added panel, adjusted hearth, and repositioned curtain marks a moment when comfort pressed gently against the limits imposed by masonry. Seen in this light, the history of these interiors is less about hardship than about persistence and adaptation. People did not wait for perfect solutions. They worked with what existed, refining small advantages, sharing practical knowledge, and gradually reshaping how spaces were used. Over generations, those modest efforts accumulated into meaningful change, guiding the transition from fortress living to residences designed with daily comfort in mind. What remains today is a layered legacy. The outer walls still speak of defense and permanence, while the traces inside, chimney placements, paneling remnants, altered windows, speak of quieter ambitions. Warmth held a little longer, drafts softened, routines made easier. Together, they tell a continuous story of how human priorities evolve and how even the most unyielding materials are, over time, negotiated into partnership with the simple, enduring desire to live in spaces that protect not only the body from threat, but the body from cold. In the final perspective, when the long history of castle habitation is viewed as a continuous thread rather than a series of isolated centuries, the persistence of cold within stone walls appears less as a problem that was ever fully solved and more as a condition that was gradually reinterpreted. Each generation inherited structures designed under older priorities, and each made small decisions about how much effort should be invested in reshaping the interior experience. Over time, these decisions accumulated into a quiet transformation of expectations. One of the most significant shifts was psychological rather than purely architectural. As people spent more of their lives in residences that could hold warmth more effectively, the memory of what had once been considered normal began to change. Rooms that earlier inhabitants would have described as tolerably cool came to be perceived as uncomfortable. This change in perception influenced not only where people preferred to live, but also how they judged the suitability of older buildings for continued use. Castles that remained active seats of authority often adapted by redefining which spaces were considered central. Instead of the Great Hall serving as the primary setting for most daily functions, attention moved towards suites of connected chambers that could be heated with greater efficiency. The hall did not disappear. It retained ceremonial importance. Yet its environmental limitations meant it was increasingly reserved for occasions where symbolism outweighed comfort. This reorganization of space altered patterns of movement within the complex. Routes that once led repeatedly through expansive, cooler areas were replaced by paths linking smaller, warmer rooms. Over years, where patterns in floors and thresholds shifted accordingly. The physical traces of daily life, polished stone where feet passed most often, quietly recorded the changing geography of comfort. Craft traditions responded as well. Carpenters refined techniques for tighter-fitting doors and shutters, reducing the slow seep of outside air. Glaziers improved the consistency of panes, allowing windows to admit light without inviting constant drafts. Textile makers produced heavier weaves capable of trapping more still air within their fibers. None of these developments were dramatic on their own, but together they created interiors that demanded less continuous intervention to remain usable. The language of household management began to include more explicit references to maintaining agreeable living conditions. Estate instructions addressed not only repairs and provisioning, but also the seasonal preparation of rooms, where additional hangings should be placed, which fireplaces required early lighting, and how to rotate the use of chambers to prevent damp accumulation. Comfort became an operational concern, integrated into the routine governance of a residence. At the same time, memory of earlier practices persisted in ceremonial gestures. Fires might still be lit in traditional hearths during important gatherings, even if newer heating arrangements existed elsewhere. Heavy tapestries continued to be displayed as symbols of lineage, long after their original insulating function was less critical in improved interiors. The past was not discarded. It was preserved in forms that carried meaning beyond immediate necessity. In regions where political stability reduced the likelihood of conflict, entire sections of fortification lost their practical role. Towers once essential for surveillance became vantage points or storage. Battlements remained as architectural signatures rather than defensive tools. As these elements shifted toward symbolism, the interior emphasis moved further toward habitability, light, dryness, and the retention of warmth over longer periods. Economic networks also influenced this transition. Increased trade made higher quality materials more accessible, including finer glass, denser fabrics, and iron components for more efficient hearths. Estates that could participate in these exchanges improved their interiors more rapidly, widening the experiential gap between older, minimally altered castles and residences updated with newer techniques. Despite these advances, the fundamental qualities of thick stone never disappeared. Even in adapted structures, exterior walls continued to absorb and release temperature slowly. On cool mornings or damp evenings, the underlying character of masonry remained perceptible. What changed was the extent to which daily life depended on overcoming that character through constant labor. As castles gradually entered periods of reduced occupation, their internal climates stabilized closer to ambient outdoor conditions. Without regular fires, moisture control, and the movement of people, rooms settled into a steady coolness. Later visitors often interpreted this as evidence that castles had always been uniformly cold, overlooking the dynamic microclimates once created by active households. Modern historical study has increasingly emphasized these dynamics, recognizing that past interiors were shaped as much by behavior as by structure. Reconstructions and careful readings of architectural modifications reveal how inhabitants manipulated airflow, layered materials, and scheduled activity to create workable environments. The castle emerges not as a static shell, but as a setting continuously adjusted through practice. For contemporary audiences, this understanding reframes familiar imagery. The grandeur of towering walls is balanced by an appreciation of the daily effort required to live among them. Warmth was not an invisible utility delivered through hidden systems. It was visible in stacked firewood, in the placement of screens, in the thickness of curtains drawn at dusk. The maintenance of comfort was part of the visual and sensory fabric of the household. In educational settings and preserved sites, conveying this reality often relies on subtle cues rather than dramatic displays. A room arranged with layered textiles, a hearth set with period tools, or a chamber left intentionally cool can communicate more about lived experience than any single artifact. Visitors sense, even briefly, the negotiation that once defined routine life within these walls. Looking across the centuries, the trajectory from fortress to residence to monument illustrates how built environments outlast the priorities that created them. Castles were conceived for endurance and defense, yet the people who inhabited them continually sought ways to soften their harsher qualities. Over time, those efforts influenced broader architectural trends that favored dwellings capable of providing steadier internal climates. The enduring significance of medieval castles, therefore, lies not only in their military history or visual drama, but in the record they preserve of patient adaptation. Each added layer, paneling, glazing, textile, partition, marks a moment when human need pressed gently against the constraints of stone. None of these changes erased the original purpose, but together they reshaped how the spaces were experienced day to day. In the quiet details of soot-darkened flues, worn thresholds near favored hearths, and remnants of fixtures that once held heavy hangings, the story of warmth persists. It is a story defined less by innovation in a single moment than by persistence across many. Generations learned where heat gathered, how long it lingered, and what small actions could preserve it through the night. Ultimately, the cold of medieval castles serves as a reminder that architecture is always a conversation between material and inhabitant. Stone offered security, visibility, and permanence, People answered with fire, fabric, and routine. Through centuries of repetition, that conversation produced environments that were never perfectly comfortable, yet were consistently made livable through care and attention. What remains today is the physical memory of that exchange. The walls stand as they were built, thick, enduring, and slow to change, while the traces within them speak of countless evenings spent tending embers, closing shutters, and gathering close to shared warmth. In this long, measured history, comfort was not a fixed feature but an achievement renewed each day, a quiet testament to the steady, practical ingenuity of those who learned to inhabit stone without ever expecting it to become something other than what it was. As the story of these interiors reaches its quiet conclusion, it is useful to step back and consider how the accumulated habits of centuries shaped not only buildings, but expectations about what a dwelling ought to provide. Medieval castles began as instruments of control, structures intended to command territory, resist attack, and signal authority across the landscape. Warmth, when it appeared, was a byproduct of activity rather than a guaranteed feature of the design. Yet over long stretches of time, the persistent effort required to maintain even modest comfort gradually altered what residents believed a proper home should feel like. This change did not emerge from theory or formal planning. It grew from repeated experience. When a smaller chamber retained heat longer than a vast hall, that difference was remembered. When improved glazing reduced drafts, the benefit was felt immediately and discussed in practical terms. When a partition created a room that could be warmed with less fuel, the efficiency became part of household knowledge. In this way, lived results, not abstract ideals, guided the slow redefinition of residential priorities. By the later phases of castle habitation, many estates operated with a layered understanding of space. Certain areas were preserved for display, lineage, and ceremony, while others were quietly optimized for daily use. The distinction was not always visible from the outside. A visitor approaching the outer walls still encountered the familiar silhouette of towers and battlements. Inside, however, routines increasingly centered on rooms that balanced light, dryness, and the ability to hold warmth for longer intervals. This internal shift influenced how people organized their days. Administrative tasks, correspondence, and instruction were scheduled in spaces where temperature remained relatively stable. Social gatherings moved toward chambers that allowed conversation without the distraction of persistent drafts. Even moments of rest were shaped by the knowledge that a well-prepared room, curtains drawn, fire properly tended, shutters secured, could preserve comfort through the evening with less continual adjustment. Material culture reflected these preferences. Furniture designed for specific rooms replaced some of the earlier emphasis on easily movable pieces. Built-in storage took advantage of interior walls less exposed to exterior chill. Surface finishes, plaster, paneling, layered textiles, softened the direct contact between occupants and stone. Each choice reduced the amount of daily labor needed to achieve an acceptable environment. At the same time, memory of the older, more demanding conditions remained present in language and custom. Expressions that emphasized keeping the heat, closing against the wind, or banking the fire persisted, even where newer designs made these tasks easier. Traditions formed under necessity often outlast the necessity itself, carried forward as habits that continue to provide reassurance against unpredictable weather. The broader landscape of European architecture absorbed these lessons. Residences built in subsequent centuries increasingly treated thermal comfort as a central concern rather than an afterthought. Proportions changed, window technology advanced, and interior layouts prioritized sequences of rooms that could be managed individually. The castle did not disappear from cultural imagination, but its role as a primary model for elite living diminished as alternatives proved more accommodating to daily life. In regions where old fortifications were retained, they often became anchors of identity rather than hubs of routine habitation. Families maintained them as symbols of continuity, hosting occasional gatherings within their historic halls while spending most of the year in more temperate quarters nearby. The contrast between spaces used for ceremony and those used for living underscored how far expectations had shifted. Over time, this separation allowed the environmental character of older stone interiors to become more noticeable. Without constant fires, movement, and maintenance, the natural coolness of thick masonry reasserted itself. Visitors encountered rooms that felt austere not because they had changed, but because the practices that once moderated them were no longer in daily use. The building remained the same. The relationship between building and inhabitant had evolved. Modern conservation approaches tend to respect this distinction. Rather than transforming historic chambers into fully climate-controlled environments, many preservation efforts aim to stabilize conditions gently, managing moisture, encouraging airflow, and preventing rapid temperature swings that could damage materials. The result is an experience that retains a trace of the original atmosphere, allowing contemporary observers to sense the qualities earlier occupants worked continuously to balance. This sensory continuity offers a rare form of historical insight. Standing within a cool stone hall, one can perceive how scale, material, and air interact in ways that written descriptions only approximate. The faint echo of footsteps, the subdued light filtering through narrow openings, and the lingering chill near exterior walls all hint at the daily negotiations that once defined routine life. Understanding these environments through such details shifts attention away from dramatic episodes and toward sustained practice. The history of castles is often told through sieges, alliances, and political change, yet far more hours were spent maintaining fires, adjusting hangings, sealing gaps, and choosing where to gather for the greatest warmth. The true continuity of life within these structures lay in these small, repeated actions. Across generations, this steady work cultivated a practical form of ingenuity. People learned how to read the building, how stone responded to weather, where drafts intensified, which rooms held warmth longest after sunset. Knowledge accumulated not as formal science but as shared experience, refined through observation and passed along through demonstration. The castle became, in effect, a teacher of environmental awareness. When viewed in the widest perspective, the enduring lesson of medieval castle life is not simply that these buildings were cold. It is that their inhabitants developed systems, material, behavioral, and architectural, to create livable conditions within constraints that could not be removed entirely. Warmth was never guaranteed. It was assembled, protected, and distributed with care. As newer forms of residence gradually replaced the castle as the center of domestic life, those systems did not vanish. They informed the design of houses that sought to retain heat more effectively, reduce drafts, and provide steadier interior climates. In this way, the long experience of living within stone contributed indirectly to the evolution of more comfortable architecture across Europe. Today, the silhouette of the castle still suggests permanence and strength. Yet within its walls lies a quieter narrative, one of patience, adaptation, and the daily effort required to transform austere spaces into habitable ones. The contrast between imposing exterior and carefully managed interior reveals how human priorities evolve, even when the materials themselves remain unchanged. The final impression is therefore not of hardship alone, but of continuity shaped by attentive care. For centuries, Inhabitants met the same challenge each winter: how to hold a measure of warmth inside walls built to endure rather than to comfort. Their answer was never a single invention, but a constellation of small practices repeated faithfully: tending embers, layering fabric, closing against the wind, gathering close to shared heat. In that repetition lies the true legacy of life inside medieval castles. The stones endure as monuments, but the history they carry is written in quieter terms, in soot traced along old flues, in fittings that once held heavy curtains, in rooms proportioned just small enough to keep warm a little longer. Together, these traces speak of a long partnership between human need and unyielding material, a partnership sustained by the simple, persistent desire to make even the coldest walls capable of sheltering everyday life. In drawing the narrative toward its most reflective point, it is helpful to consider how the experience of living within cold stone ultimately shaped not only buildings and routines, but also the way later generations interpreted the past. When people in subsequent centuries encountered castles that were quieter, less occupied, and no longer sustained by daily fires, they often perceived them as inherently austere places. Yet this impression was, in part, the result of absence, the absence of the continuous human activity that once created pockets of warmth within those walls. At their height of use, castles were rarely still. Movement itself contributed to livability. Doors opened and closed, carrying small exchanges of air. Fires were stirred, releasing fresh heat. Textiles were adjusted, altering how drafts moved through rooms. Even the presence of many bodies in a shared space raised the temperature slightly. Without these rhythms, the same architecture felt markedly colder, emphasizing how much comfort had depended on ongoing participation rather than static design. This distinction between inhabited and uninhabited states is important for understanding historical perception. A visitor walking through a largely empty fortress centuries later encountered a building in its resting condition, not in the dynamic state it maintained during active residence. The chill that seemed defining may once have been moderated daily by habits now forgotten. In this sense, the environmental character of castles was never fixed. It fluctuated with use. Cultural memory, however, tends to preserve strong impressions. The image of vast, cool halls became a shorthand for medieval life, reinforcing the idea that earlier centuries accepted discomfort as inevitable. While it is true that expectations differed, the historical record shows persistent effort to improve conditions wherever possible. Investments in better glazing, thicker hangings, additional hearths, and smaller living chambers all indicate a sustained desire to make interiors more accommodating. Over time, literature, art, and later architectural revivals drew upon the visual drama of stone fortifications, while often overlooking the practical measures that had once softened their interiors. Romanticized depictions favored towering walls, echoing corridors, and candlelit chambers, elements that conveyed atmosphere but not the daily maintenance behind them. The quieter story of fuel management, textile layering, and careful room selection remained largely implicit. Modern historical scholarship has worked to rebalance this view by focusing on lived experience. By examining where patterns, residue from long-used hearths, and the placement of fixtures intended to hold curtains or screens, researchers reconstruct how inhabitants actively shaped their environment. These details reveal that comfort, though limited, was pursued through consistent, thoughtful practice rather than ignored. Educational interpretations within preserved sites increasingly reflect this approach. Instead of presenting rooms as static displays, some reconstructions arrange furniture, textiles, and hearth tools to suggest how spaces function day to day. The goal is not to recreate luxury, but to illustrate process, the sequence of actions that transformed a cold chamber into a temporarily warmer one. Visitors can then understand the building as a stage for routine labor as much as for ceremony. This perspective also highlights the relationship between technological change and expectation. Once improvements in heating efficiency and building design became widespread, tolerance for persistent chill decreased. People who had experienced more stable indoor climates judged older conditions more critically. The same stone walls that once represented security began to symbolize inconvenience when compared with newer standards. Yet, even as expectations rose, the symbolic value of castles endured. Their presence in the landscape continued to signal continuity, lineage, and authority. Families preserved them as anchors of identity, sometimes maintaining select rooms for formal use while relying on adjacent residences for everyday comfort. In these mixed-use environments, the contrast between ceremonial grandeur and practical warmth became part of the lived experience. From a broader architectural standpoint, the lessons learned within castles contributed to a gradual redefinition of what permanence should mean. Earlier, permanence had been equated with mass and resistance, the ability of walls to withstand attack and time. Later, it came to include durability combined with habitability, the capacity of a structure to support sustained, comfortable living without excessive daily intervention. This shift did not reject stone as a material, but it encouraged new ways of combining it with wood, plaster, glass, and improved spatial planning. Environmental awareness played a subtle role in this transition. Centuries of observing how cold moved through masonry, how moisture accumulated, and how heat dissipated taught builders and occupants alike that material choice alone could not guarantee comfort. Orientation, proportion, airflow, and layering mattered just as much. These insights, gained through experience rather than formal theory, informed the evolution of residential design across much of Europe. In contemporary times, when climate control is often hidden behind walls and delivered with minimal effort, it can be difficult to imagine a world where warmth depended on constant attention. The medieval castle offers a rare window into such a world. Its spaces make visible the relationship between effort and comfort, reminding us that stable indoor climates are a relatively recent achievement in architectural history. Standing within these structures today, one can sense the dialogue that once defined daily life. The cool surface of stone suggests endurance. The remnants of hearths and fixtures suggest response. Together, they testify to a long partnership in which people adapted themselves and their surroundings in small, repeated ways. No single innovation transformed the environment, but countless adjustments made it workable. The enduring relevance of this history lies in its demonstration that buildings are never finished in a practical sense. They continue to be shaped by how they are used, maintained, and understood. Medieval castles began as fortifications, evolved into complex residences, and now often serve as educational or cultural landmarks. At each stage, their interiors reflected the priorities of those who occupied them. In the quiet traces left behind, smoke-darkened stone, anchor points for heavy drapery, alcoves positioned away from prevailing drafts, we can read the cumulative record of efforts to hold warmth a little longer. These marks are modest, yet together they form a detailed account of adaptation sustained over centuries. Ultimately, the story of cold within castle walls is not one of failure to achieve comfort, but of a different balance between necessity and possibility. Defense and permanence once outweighed ease, and so inhabitants met the challenge with routine, material, and cooperation. As conditions changed, the balance shifted, encouraging new forms of residence that carried forward the practical knowledge earned in earlier, harsher settings. What remains is a layered inheritance. the castles still stand as monuments of strength, while the subtle evidence inside them speaks of patient ingenuity. The steady, everyday work of transforming austere spaces into places where life could unfold. Through this lens, the chill of stone is no longer simply a sign of hardship. It becomes a reminder of how human attention, applied consistently over time, can reshape even the most unyielding environments into homes capable of sustaining community, memory, and continuity. In the closing stretch of this long examination, it is worth considering how the lessons learned within castle walls extended beyond aristocratic life and gradually influenced broader patterns of dwelling across Europe. While most people never lived inside a great fortress, the architectural ideas that evolved there, about managing drafts, conserving heat, and organizing space into smaller, more controllable rooms, filtered outward through craftsmen, builders, and shared practice. Techniques refined in elite settings often reappeared, in simpler form, in townhouses, farmsteads, and later urban residences. Carpenters who had installed paneling in a lord's chamber might apply similar methods in a merchant's home, reducing direct exposure to cold masonry or brick. Glaziers who improved the fit of small panes for castle windows carried that skill into civic buildings. Textile production, encouraged by demand for thicker hangings and coverings, expanded the availability of fabrics that could also serve ordinary households. In this way, the quiet pursuit of warmth inside castles contributed indirectly to a wider culture of interior comfort. These exchanges did not create uniform living conditions. Differences in wealth and region remained significant, but they did spread an expectation that buildings could be arranged to moderate the environment rather than simply endure it. Over generations, the idea that a residence should offer some protection from persistent chill became less exceptional and more commonplace. The castle, once a place where people adapted themselves to the structure, helped inspire a future in which structures were increasingly adapted to people. At the same time, the symbolic language of stone fortification retained its appeal. Even as newer houses emphasized light and warmth, elements such as towers, crenellations, and thick walls were sometimes echoed in decorative form. These features conveyed continuity with the past without reintroducing the full environmental severity of earlier designs. Architecture began to separate appearance from function, maintaining the visual authority of the castle while quietly embracing more habitable construction. This separation is visible in later country houses that present strong, balanced facades yet contain interiors arranged for comfort and efficiency. Rooms align along corridors that limit drafts, windows admit generous daylight, and fireplaces are proportioned for specific spaces rather than vast halls. The lessons of centuries about how heat moves, how air circulates, and how materials respond to damp are embedded in these designs, even when the connection to medieval precedent is no longer explicit. The transition also altered daily rhythms. In buildings capable of retaining warmth longer, activities no longer needed to cluster so tightly around a single hearth. Work, study, and leisure could occur simultaneously in different rooms without requiring constant relocation. Privacy increased not only for social reasons but because smaller heated spaces made solitude physically tolerable. The environmental constraint that once encouraged communal proximity gradually eased. Yet the memory of shared warmth did not vanish entirely. Cultural habits, gathering in a central room during winter evenings, valuing heavy curtains, or associating firelight with comfort, persisted long after architecture made them less necessary. These traditions carried emotional meaning as well as practical function, linking later generations to experiences shaped in much colder interiors. In preserved castles today, efforts to interpret daily life often emphasize this interplay between necessity and custom. Demonstrations of hearth lighting, displays of layered bedding, and reconstructions of textile-hung walls help visitors understand that comfort was created through process. The building alone did not provide it. People did, through attentive routine. Such interpretations shift focus from dramatic events to sustained care, highlighting the quiet labor that underpinned ordinary existence. From a material perspective, the endurance of stone continues to influence how these sites are maintained. Conservation specialists must balance the desire to make interiors accessible with the need to protect ancient masonry from moisture and thermal stress. Gentle ventilation, controlled visitor flow, and selective heating in limited areas aim to preserve both structure and atmosphere. The goal is not to transform castles into modern environments, but to stabilize them so their historical character remains legible. For contemporary observers, this restraint can be revealing. Experiencing a naturally cool chamber encourages reflection on how expectations have changed. What once required constant management is now encountered as a brief sensation during a visit. The contrast underscores how deeply modern life depends on hidden systems that regulate temperature without visible effort. Looking back across the full narrative, the cold of medieval castles emerges as a continuous thread linking architecture, behavior, technology, and culture. It shaped where people sat, how they dressed, when they worked, and which rooms became central to daily routine. It encouraged innovations in textiles, glazing, and fireplace design. It influenced the gradual shift from fortified strongholds to residences designed with habitation in mind. Most importantly, it reveals that comfort is not a fixed standard but a moving threshold. What one era accepts as ordinary, another seeks to improve. The inhabitants of castles did not passively endure their surroundings. They refined countless small strategies to make life workable within them. Those strategies, accumulated over generations, helped guide the evolution of more temperate living spaces across the centuries that followed. The enduring image of the castle, solid against the horizon, therefore contains a quieter interior history. Behind the thick walls lay a daily practice of tending, adjusting, and preserving warmth where none was guaranteed. Each shutter closed against evening wind, each tapestry hung to soften a draft, each ember coaxed back to flame represents a moment of practical ingenuity. In the present, as these structures stand largely free from the routines that once animated them, their cool interiors serve as a physical archive of that ingenuity. The stones hold the memory of repeated effort, of seasons measured by the work required to keep a room habitable. Visitors may feel only a hint of that reality, yet it is enough to suggest the partnership that once defined life within. Seen in its entirety, the history of temperature inside medieval castles is not simply about discomfort or adaptation in isolation. It is about continuity, how human needs persist, how materials impose limits, and how patient, incremental change bridges the two. The walls endure because they were built to last. The traces within endure because generations chose, day after day, to shape those spaces into homes. In that long partnership between endurance and care, the castle becomes more than a relic of conflict or power. It stands as evidence of a sustained human effort to reconcile permanence with livability, to hold warmth, however briefly, inside structures designed first to resist the world outside. As this examination reaches its final layers, the enduring significance of medieval castles can be understood not through their moments of crisis, but through the ordinary continuity of life sustained within them. The cold that defined their interiors was not an interruption to daily routine. It was the condition around which routine was organized. Every aspect of habitation, movement, work, rest, and social interaction, took shape in response to an environment that demanded awareness and cooperation. This awareness cultivated a particular attentiveness to surroundings. Inhabitants learned to sense subtle changes in air movement, to recognize when stone walls had absorbed too much damp, or when a hearth required adjustment before the chill deepened further. These sensitivities were practical rather than reflective, yet they fostered a close relationship between people and the spaces they occupied. The building was not an abstract backdrop, but an active presence in daily life. Such attentiveness also shaped expectations about effort. Comfort was never assumed to be automatic. It required preparation, fuel gathered in advance, fabrics arranged with care, shutters checked before dusk. These tasks did not feel exceptional. They were woven into the rhythm of household responsibility. In this context, warmth carried a different meaning. It was valued not as a default condition, but as the result of foresight and labor shared across the household. The social implications of this shared effort were significant. Maintaining livable conditions encouraged coordination between roles. Servants managing fires, household officers overseeing supplies, family members adapting their activities to available warmth. Cooperation was embedded in routine, reinforcing hierarchical structures while also creating interdependence. Even those of high status relied on the quiet competence of others to sustain daily comfort. This dynamic influenced how authority was experienced within castle walls. Power was expressed not only through command and ceremony, but through the ability to marshal resources that made life within stone workable. A well-managed household, one that remained relatively dry, organized, and warm despite the environment, demonstrated effective leadership in tangible terms. Comfort, limited though it was, became a subtle indicator of order. As generations passed, the memory of how to achieve this balance accumulated into tradition. Certain practices persisted even as conditions improved elsewhere, not because they were strictly necessary, but because they were trusted. Banking a fire before sleep, drawing curtains at twilight, consolidating activity into fewer rooms during winter. These habits endured as cultural inheritances shaped by centuries of experience. When later architectural forms made it possible to retain warmth with less effort, these inherited practices did not disappear immediately. Instead, they coexisted with new technologies, gradually fading only as expectations adjusted. This overlap created a period in which older routines were maintained alongside newer conveniences, reinforcing the sense that warmth had once been fragile and should not be taken lightly. The persistence of these habits also influenced emotional associations with space. Rooms prepared carefully for winter evenings carried a sense of refuge that extended beyond temperature alone. The act of drawing close to shared heat fostered intimacy and continuity, qualities that later generations would remember even after architecture made such closeness less necessary. The memory of warmth earned through effort remained culturally resonant. In this way, the cold of medieval castles indirectly shaped values related to domestic life. It reinforced the idea that care, preparation, and attentiveness mattered. Spaces were not simply occupied, they were maintained. This mindset, developed under constraint, informed later approaches to household management even as material conditions improved. From the perspective of modern observers, accustomed to environments regulated by hidden systems, this relationship between effort and comfort can feel distant. Yet, the physical presence of castles preserves the conditions that made such effort meaningful. The coolness of stone, the scale of halls, and the absence of insulation offer tangible reminders of a time when livability depended on visible, repeated action. Educational engagement with these spaces often benefits from emphasizing this continuity rather than focusing solely on spectacle. Understanding how ordinary days unfolded, how warmth was managed hour by hour, provides insight into medieval life that complements political and military narratives. It reveals how people adapted not through dramatic innovation, but through sustained practice. The long history of castle interiors therefore illustrates a broader truth about human environments. Buildings impose limits, but within those limits, people develop systems of use that reflect priorities and values. When defense dominated, cold was tolerated. When stability increased, efforts to retain warmth grew more deliberate. Each shift in priority left material traces that can still be read today. In the present, as these structures stand largely silent, their interiors invite reflection on how expectations of comfort have evolved. What once required constant attention is now delivered invisibly in most dwellings. The contrast highlights both the ingenuity of earlier inhabitants and the extent to which modern comfort depends on technologies that remove environmental awareness from daily life. Yet the lesson of medieval castles is not one of hardship alone. It is a lesson in adaptation, how people learned to live well enough within constraints they could not fully remove. Through layering, partitioning, and routine, they transformed austere spaces into functioning homes. The result was not luxury, but continuity. That continuity is what ultimately defines these buildings. They endured because they were built to last. They remained habitable because generations invested effort in understanding and responding to their nature. Warmth was never fully conquered, but it was negotiated repeatedly, season after season, through attention and care. In the end, the cold of medieval castles stands as a reminder that architecture and habit are inseparable. Stone provided security and permanence. Human practice supplied livability. Together, they formed environments capable of sustaining life across centuries. The walls still stand, bearing silent witness to countless evenings spent tending fires and closing shutters, to shared warmth gathered briefly before dispersing again into stone. Through this lens, medieval castles can be seen not only as monuments of power, but as records of everyday perseverance. Their interiors tell a story written slowly, in small adjustments repeated over generations. A story of how people learned to inhabit spaces that were never designed for comfort, and in doing so, shaped the very idea of what a home could be. In the final reflection, the enduring presence of medieval castles invites a broader understanding of how environments shape human expectations across time. These structures, conceived in an age when security and visibility outweighed personal comfort, became long-term experiments in adaptation. Generations lived within their walls, each learning, often without formal instruction, how to negotiate the steady influence of cold stone, moving air, and seasonal damp. What is striking, when viewed across centuries, is how rarely the response to these conditions took the form of a single decisive solution. Instead, change arrived through accumulation. A thicker hanging here, a better fitted shutter there, a smaller chamber carved from a larger one, a hearth adjusted to draw more effectively. None of these measures transformed the castle into a uniformly warm residence. Yet together they altered the daily experience in meaningful ways. Comfort emerged not as a permanent state, but as a series of small, maintained advantages. This pattern reveals something fundamental about pre-modern life. Stability was achieved through routine rather than automation. The reliability people sought came from repetition, lighting fires at consistent times, closing barriers against evening drafts, rotating the use of rooms according to weather. These practices created predictability within an otherwise variable environment. Over years, predictability itself became a form of comfort. The architecture both resisted and encouraged this rhythm. Thick walls slowed temperature change, meaning that once a room gained a measure of warmth, it could be preserved briefly through careful management. At the same time, that same mass ensured that neglected spaces cooled quickly and remained so. The building rewarded attention and quietly penalized inattention. Inhabitants responded by developing habits that kept key areas within a tolerable range, accepting that the entire structure could never be brought to the same level. Such selective comfort influenced how people understood the idea of inside. In a modern sense, interior space is expected to provide a consistent climate. Within medieval castles, interior meant relative shelter, protection from wind and precipitation, while temperature varied from room to room and hour to hour. The boundary between inside and outside was therefore less absolute. It was experienced as a gradient rather than a sharp divide. Over time, as alternative forms of residence demonstrated that more stable interiors were possible, this definition began to shift. The expectation that a home should moderate not only weather but also temperature gained strength. The castle, once an unquestioned model of elite living, gradually became an example of an older balance between defense and habitability. New buildings did not abandon permanence, but they reinterpreted it, seeking durability alongside a steadier internal environment. Even after many castles ceased to function as primary homes, their physical lessons persisted. Builders, craftsmen, and household managers carried forward practical knowledge about airflow, insulation through layering, and the importance of room proportion. These insights informed later domestic architecture in ways that are often invisible but deeply embedded, seen in the placement of hearths, the use of vestibules, and the preference for sequences of rooms that buffer exterior conditions. In cultural memory, however, castles retained their dramatic image, looming silhouettes, echoing halls, and candlelit chambers. This imagery emphasizes grandeur, yet it can obscure the quieter reality that sustained everyday life. Behind the spectacle existed a continuous effort to keep spaces usable. Ash cleared, embers preserved, textiles adjusted, doors secured against shifting wind. The true continuity of castle life was measured less by events than by maintenance. Modern encounters with these buildings often restore a fragment of that awareness. The immediate sensation of cool air near stone, the way sound carries across vaulted ceilings, and the subdued light entering through narrow openings all suggest how different the interior experience once was. Even brief exposure can prompt a recognition that comfort was historically contingent, something earned through attention rather than delivered automatically. This recognition has value beyond historical curiosity. It highlights how deeply present-day living depends on systems designed to remove environmental variability from daily awareness. Heating, insulation, and sealed construction create interiors where temperature is largely detached from weather. Medieval castles, by contrast, made that relationship visible. They required inhabitants to remain conscious of season, time of day, and the behavior of materials around them. Seen in this light, the cold of castle interiors becomes more than a detail of inconvenience. It becomes a lens through which to understand how people organized labor, shared space, and defined routine. Warmth gathered near a hearth encouraged proximity and conversation. Cooler peripheral zones limited prolonged activity. The building's thermal landscape shaped patterns of social interaction as surely as walls shaped movement. Across generations, these patterns produced a distinctive domestic culture, one grounded in attentiveness, cooperation, and incremental improvement. No single innovation transformed the environment, but each small refinement, Better glazing, denser fabrics, more efficient chimneys reduced the burden slightly. Progress was measured not in dramatic leaps, but in evenings that remained comfortable a little longer after the fire burned low. Today, the stones endure while the routines that once animated them have largely faded. Yet traces remain. Soot-darkened flues, fittings where curtains once hung, alcoves positioned to escape prevailing drafts. These details function as a quiet archive of practical knowledge, recording how inhabitants read their surroundings and responded with patience. In the broadest sense, medieval castles illustrate an enduring principle of human habitation. Buildings express priorities at the moment of their creation, but those priorities are never final. As needs evolve, people adapt spaces through use, modification, and habit. The result is a layered environment in which original intentions coexist with later adjustments. The legacy of castle interiors, therefore, is not simply that they were cold. It is that they demonstrate how sustained attention can transform even uncompromising materials into workable homes. Stone provided permanence and protection. Human practice supplied warmth, however temporary. Between those two forces, endurance and adaptation, daily life found its balance. Standing within these structures now, one encounters both elements at once. The unyielding solidity of masonry and the subtle evidence of centuries spent negotiating with it. The partnership is still legible. It reminds us that comfort, often taken for granted today, has a history shaped by effort, observation, and shared routine. In that long, quiet history, medieval castles become more than relics of conflict or authority. They become records of perseverance, places where countless ordinary evenings were made livable through small, repeated acts. Warmth was never guaranteed, yet it was continually pursued, gathered around flame and fabric, held for a time against the steady pull of cold stone. In the very last consideration, what remains most revealing about medieval castles is not simply how they were built, but how they were continuously interpreted by the people who lived within them. Each generation inherited the same enduring walls, yet no generation experienced those walls in exactly the same way. Climate varied, resources shifted, technologies improved, and expectations slowly changed. The structure stayed largely constant. The meaning of living inside it did not. For early occupants, the castle represented safety above all else. Its thickness, height, and visibility answered immediate concerns about attack and instability. In such a context, the persistent coolness of stone interiors was an accepted exchange, comfort given up in return for protection. The routines that developed around managing warmth were therefore practical responses to a priority that few would have questioned. As stability increased across many regions, the emotional weight of that exchange began to lighten. Protection remained important, but it was no longer the only measure of a successful residence. Light, dryness, and ease of daily activity gained quiet importance. This did not happen as a sudden rejection of the old model, but as a gradual recalibration. Rooms once valued for defensibility were reconsidered in terms of how well they supported sustained living. In this transition, the castle became a place where two sets of values coexisted. Its exterior continued to signal endurance and authority, while its interior was incrementally adjusted to meet emerging expectations of comfort. The tension between these values is visible in the layered modifications found in many surviving sites. Paneling added over stone, windows enlarged within ancient openings, partitions inserted to create more manageable spaces. Each change represents a moment when daily life pressed gently against inherited design. These adaptations also reveal how knowledge was carried forward. Both builders and household managers did not approach each winter as if it were entirely new. They relied on accumulated experience, understanding which winds were most troublesome, which rooms held warmth longest, and how materials behaved after prolonged damp. This practical memory functioned as a form of continuity, linking present occupants with those who had faced the same conditions decades earlier. The social fabric of castle life was shaped by this continuity. Shared awareness of environmental limits encouraged coordinated behavior. Fires were tended according to agreed routines, doors managed with care, and fabrics positioned where they made the greatest difference. Even when hierarchy determined who performed which tasks, the overall system depended on cooperation. Comfort, modest though it was, emerged from collective effort rather than individual control. Over time, as alternative residences demonstrated that architecture could shoulder more of the burden, these cooperative systems gradually relaxed. Warmer, better-lit interiors reduced the need for constant vigilance against drafts and damp. Yet the memory of earlier practices lingered in customs and expectations, an inherited caution that valued preparedness even when conditions improved. This lingering memory helps explain why certain domestic gestures, closing curtains at dusk, gathering in a central room during cold evenings, maintaining a visible hearth as a focal point, persisted long after their original necessity faded. They carried cultural meaning rooted in centuries when such actions were essential to daily comfort. The castle, in this sense, influenced not only buildings but habits that extended far beyond its walls. In the modern era, when many castles serve as historic sites, their interiors offer a rare opportunity to encounter a different relationship between people and environment. Without the constant mediation of contemporary climate control, visitors experience subtle variations in temperature, sound, and light that echo earlier conditions. These sensations are gentle, yet they hint at how attentive earlier inhabitants needed to be simply to maintain a workable space. Such encounters can shift perspective. Rather than viewing the past solely through events and dates, one begins to appreciate the steady background of lived experience, the repeated acts that made ordinary days possible. The history of castles, seen this way, is not dominated by moments of conflict, but by the quieter persistence of maintenance and adaptation. Across the full span of centuries, the cold of medieval stone never truly disappeared. It was moderated, redirected, and managed, but its presence remained part of the architectural character. What changed was the balance between what the building imposed and what its occupants expected. As expectations rose, new forms of residence emerged that aligned more closely with the desire for stable, comfortable interiors. Yet the castle's legacy did not fade with that shift. Its lessons about airflow, layering, proportion, and the value of smaller, heat-retaining spaces fed into the broader evolution of domestic architecture. Even today, principles such as insulating surfaces, controlling drafts, and organizing rooms by function reflect insights once learned through long experience with stone environments. In the end, medieval castles stand as records of an extended negotiation between permanence and livability. Their walls were designed to endure centuries. Their interiors required daily care to remain habitable. Within that tension, generations developed systems of use that balanced necessity with possibility. Warmth was never absolute, but it was repeatedly achieved in pockets, around hearths, behind hangings, within enclosed beds, through attentive routine. What these structures preserve is therefore more than a silhouette of power. They preserve evidence of patient ingenuity, the countless small decisions that allowed life to continue within spaces never intended for comfort. Each soot-marked chimney, each altered window, Each remnant of a curtain fitting speaks of evenings spent holding heat against the slow pull of cold stone. Seen from this final vantage, the story is not one of hardship alone, nor of technological triumph. It is a story of continuity, of how people, faced with enduring constraints, refined their habits until those constraints became manageable. The castle did not change its nature. People changed their relationship to it. That relationship, steady, observant, and collaborative, made it possible for generations to transform austere fortifications into functioning homes. And though the fires have long since faded, the marks they left behind continue to testify to a simple, enduring truth. Comfort is often not given by a building, but created within it, day after day, through the quiet persistence of those who live there. At the very end of this long reflection, the medieval castle can be understood as a kind of enduring conversation between material and habit. A conversation that unfolded slowly across generations and left its record not in grand proclamations, but in subtle traces. The stone itself spoke in the language of mass and permanence, holding the memory of weather and season within its surfaces. The people who lived there answered in the language of routine, through fire, fabric, movement, and careful timing. What makes this exchange especially revealing is that neither side ever fully overcame the other. The walls never ceased to be cool, and the inhabitants never ceased to seek ways to soften that coolness. Instead, a balance emerged, maintained through repetition. Each day began with the quiet work of restoring usable warmth, and each evening ended with efforts to preserve it as long as possible. Over years, these small cycles formed the true rhythm of life inside the fortress. This rhythm shaped perception as much as it shaped practice. When warmth is something that must be created and protected, it carries a different emotional weight. A room that held heat for an extra hour after sunset was not merely convenient. It represented successful stewardship. A well-tended hearth signaled reliability. Even modest comfort, achieved through effort, reinforced a sense that order had been maintained against the steady pressure of the environment. Such meanings influenced how spaces were valued. The most desirable chambers were not always the largest or most impressive, but those that combined light, dryness, and the ability to retain warmth. Over time, these preferences subtly redirected architectural attention. New partitions appeared, ceilings lowered, windows refined, changes that acknowledged, without erasing, the original defensive logic of the structure. In this gradual redirection, the castle became layered with intentions from different eras. The earliest builders emphasized strength and visibility. Later occupants emphasized livability within that strength. Still later caretakers emphasized preservation and interpretation. Each phase added another set of priorities without entirely removing the previous ones. The result is a building that contains multiple histories at once, readable through its materials and modifications. The persistence of routine also fostered a form of environmental literacy. Inhabitants learned to anticipate how a damp morning might affect the feel of a chamber by evening, or how a change in wind direction would alter drafts along a corridor. This knowledge was rarely formalized, yet it was precise and practical. It allowed households to respond before discomfort became severe, turning observation into quiet control. When architecture in later centuries began to provide more stable interior climates, this kind of attentiveness became less necessary for daily survival. Yet its legacy remained in cultural habits, valuing well-prepared rooms, associating firelight with safety, and treating the home as a space that should be actively cared for rather than passively occupied. The memory of effort continued to shape expectations even as technology reduced the need for it. Today, encountering a preserved castle offers a brief return to that earlier relationship. The coolness of stone, the echo within high vaults, and the subdued daylight filtering through narrow openings remind visitors that interiors were once dynamic environments requiring participation. These sensations are gentle, but they invite reflection on how thoroughly modern life has separated comfort from visible labor. From a wider historical perspective, the castle's story illustrates how built forms outlast the conditions that created them. Structures designed for a world of frequent conflict remained standing as that world changed, and people adapted them to new purposes. In doing so, they demonstrated that permanence in architecture does not mean rigidity in use. Enduring materials can host evolving ways of living. The cumulative record of these adaptations, paneling over stone, improved glazing, added hearths, subdivided halls, shows that progress often arrives through modest, continuous refinement rather than sudden transformation. Each generation made adjustments that seemed practical in the moment. Only in retrospect do those adjustments reveal a clear trajectory toward interiors that better supported daily comfort. Yet even as newer residences achieved that goal more effectively, the castle retained its symbolic resonance. It continued to represent continuity, ancestry, and the idea of shelter against uncertainty. That symbolism was strengthened, not weakened, by the knowledge that life within its walls had required patience and cooperation. The building's endurance mirrored the endurance of the routines that once sustained it. In the end, the history of temperature inside medieval castles is less about cold as an isolated fact and more about the relationship that cold created. It encouraged habits of care, fostered shared responsibility, and guided incremental innovation. Warmth was never permanent, but it was repeatedly reclaimed. An achievement renewed with each tended fire and each curtain drawn against the night. What remains today is a quiet archive of those efforts. Soot-darkened flues, worn stone near favored hearths, and the remnants of fixtures for heavy hangings all testify to evenings spent holding heat against the slow pull of the walls. These traces do not tell stories of battles or ceremonies. They tell stories of maintenance, foresight, and the ordinary persistence required to make austere spaces livable. Seen from this final vantage, medieval castles stand not only as monuments of power, but as enduring records of human adaptability. They show how people can inhabit environments that were never designed for ease, shaping them through routine until they become, if not comfortable by modern standards, at least dependable. The partnership between unyielding stone and attentive habit created a form of stability that lasted for centuries. And so the lasting impression is a quiet one. Behind the dramatic silhouettes and thick walls lies a history measured in small, repeated acts. The steady tending of embers, the careful closing of shutters, the gathering of people close to shared warmth. Through those acts, generation after generation transformed permanence into livability, proving that even the coldest structures can sustain life when met with patience, knowledge, and the enduring human desire to make a place feel, in some modest but meaningful way, like home. With the narrative now extended across the full arc of use, adaptation, and memory, the medieval castle can be understood as a structure whose deepest history is written in routine rather than in singular events. The walls that once signaled vigilance and control also enclosed countless ordinary hours spent arranging space, preserving warmth, and maintaining a balance between the demands of the building and the needs of those within it. Over long periods, this balance produced a distinctive sense of time indoors. Days were not only measured by bells, meals, or duties, but by the behavior of heat. Morning began with the careful revival of embers. Midday activity clustered where light and relative warmth overlapped. Evening brought the deliberate closing of openings and the drawing in of fabrics to hold what heat could be kept. Night introduced a quieter vigilance, ensuring that fires were safe yet sufficient, that rooms would not cool too sharply before dawn. Such rhythms created predictability in an environment otherwise subject to weather and season. Predictability, in turn, fostered confidence. Even when temperatures were low, inhabitants knew which actions would improve conditions and which oversights would allow comfort to slip away. This practical certainty, earned through repetition, was a form of stability as meaningful as the defensive strength of the walls themselves. Within this framework, spaces acquired identities shaped by their thermal character. A chamber that held warmth slightly longer became a preferred site for writing or conversation. A corridor known for persistent drafts was crossed quickly and rarely used for lingering. Kitchens, with their sustained heat, served as both workspaces and informal refuges during colder periods. Over years, these patterns formed an internal map understood by everyone who moved through the building. That shared map influenced social life in subtle ways. Proximity to dependable warmth often coincided with proximity to authority or privilege, reinforcing existing hierarchies through physical experience. Yet it also created moments of convergence, when people of different ranks gathered near the same hearth out of practical necessity. In these small overlaps, the environment quietly shaped interaction. As architectural changes accumulated, improved glazing, added paneling, more efficient fireplaces, the map shifted. Areas once marginal became usable for longer stretches of the day. Activities dispersed into multiple rooms instead of concentrating tightly around a single fire. The building's social geography evolved alongside its thermal one, illustrating how material adjustments can ripple into patterns of behavior. Even after many castles ceased to function as primary homes, the memory of these patterns persisted in how later occupants and visitors described the spaces. References to warm corners, drafty passages, or sunlit chambers appear in accounts that focus less on grandeur and more on lived sensation. Such descriptions preserve the experiential knowledge that once guided daily movement. In modern preservation, curators often face a choice between presenting castles as static monuments or as environments shaped by use. Increasingly, interpretation favors the latter, arranging interiors to suggest how warmth was gathered, how textiles softened stone, and how routines structured the day. This approach emphasizes continuity between past and present by inviting visitors to imagine the sequence of actions that once made these rooms habitable. The educational value of this perspective lies in its emphasis on process. It reveals that historical comfort was not absent, but conditional, dependent on attention, cooperation, and resource management. Understanding this helps correct the assumption that earlier inhabitants simply endured their surroundings without attempting improvement. In reality, they pursued every practical advantage available within the limits of their materials. Across centuries, those incremental efforts contributed to broader architectural evolution. Lessons learned about airflow, insulation through layering, and the benefits of smaller, enclosed spaces informed later residential design. The castle, though eventually superseded as a primary model for living, served as a long-term testing ground where these insights were gathered through experience rather than theory. Today, when stepping into a preserved hall or chamber, the lingering coolness can be read not only as a physical sensation but as a historical signal. It points to the original priorities that shaped the structure and to the generations who worked within those constraints. The absence of constant fires makes the underlying character of stone more apparent, allowing the modern visitor to sense what earlier inhabitants continually moderated. In this way, Castles function as quiet archives of environmental negotiation. Their fabric records where heat once concentrated, where drafts were intercepted, and where space was reconfigured to improve livability. These records are subtle, visible in soot traces, altered openings, or the placement of fixtures, but together they tell a detailed story of adaptation sustained over long durations. Reflecting on that story highlights a broader principle. Buildings are not finished at the moment of construction. They continue to be shaped by use, maintenance, and shifting expectations. Medieval castles began as instruments of defense, evolved into complex residences, and now often serve as cultural landmarks. At each stage, their interiors expressed the priorities of those who occupied them. The persistent presence of cold within their walls was therefore not a static flaw but a constant partner in this evolution. It prompted habits of care, encouraged material innovation, and gradually redirected architectural attention toward comfort as stability increased. Warmth, though never permanent, became easier to achieve as knowledge accumulated. In the end, the legacy of life inside medieval castles is best understood as a testament to patient adjustment. Generations did not wait for perfect solutions. They refined small practices that, together, made austere environments workable. Through fire carefully tended, fabrics thoughtfully placed, and spaces used with intention, they created pockets of reliability within structures built primarily to endure. What remains today, enduring stone, softened by the traces of those practices, invites a final, quiet recognition. The grandeur of the castle may capture attention, but its deeper history lies in the ordinary persistence that sustained daily life within it. Comfort was never simply provided by the building. It was produced through knowledge, cooperation, and routine. In that long partnership between unyielding material and attentive habit, medieval castles reveal a lasting truth about human habitation: that livability is often the result of continuous care. Walls may stand for centuries, but it is the repeated, modest acts within them, closing a shutter, tending a hearth, gathering close to shared warmth, that transform endurance into a place where life can reliably unfold. As the narrative settles into its final quiet cadence, the medieval castle can be seen less as a static monument and more as a living system that once depended on continuous human attention. Its endurance in stone was only one half of the equation. The other half was the steady pattern of actions that kept interiors usable despite the natural tendencies of thick masonry to hold cold and damp. This dependence on ongoing care shaped how responsibility was understood within the household. Comfort was not assigned to a single moment of preparation but distributed across the day. Someone ensured fuel was dry and accessible. Someone checked shutters as weather shifted. Someone watched the behavior of smoke in the flue to judge whether airflow needed adjustment. Each small task contributed to a larger equilibrium that could be lost if neglected. Over time, these responsibilities formed a practical culture of vigilance. People learned to notice details that modern occupants rarely consider. The faint change in air along a corridor, the way a wall felt cooler after prolonged rain, the subtle difference between a fire that burned brightly and one that would fade too quickly. Such awareness did not require formal instruction. It emerged through repetition and shared experience. Within this culture, success was measured quietly. A room that remained dry through a damp season, a hearth that held embers until morning, or a chamber that could be used comfortably for longer hours signaled effective stewardship. These were modest achievements, yet they sustained the rhythm of daily life. Stability came not from eliminating environmental challenges, but from managing them predictably. As architectural improvements accumulated, better fitted windows, more efficient chimneys, additional interior surfaces that interrupted direct contact with stone, the margin for error widened. Rooms stayed usable with less constant intervention. Even so, older habits often persisted because they provided reassurance. Practices developed under stricter conditions continued to guide behavior long after they were strictly necessary. This persistence illustrates how environments leave lasting impressions on culture. The experience of having to create and preserve warmth shaped expectations about what it meant to care for a home. Preparation, foresight, and attentiveness were valued not only for comfort, but as signs of order and competence. These values traveled forward into later domestic life, even as buildings became easier to manage. When castles gradually shifted from active residences to symbolic or ceremonial spaces, the absence of daily routines revealed how much those routines had mattered. Without regular fires, movement, and maintenance, interiors settled into a cooler, quieter state. Visitors encountering these spaces centuries later often assumed that this stillness reflected their original condition, rather than recognizing it as the result of inactivity. Modern interpretation increasingly seeks to restore the sense of process that once animated these rooms. By arranging hearth tools, textiles, and furnishings in ways that suggest use rather than display, curators emphasize that livability was achieved through action. The goal is not to recreate constant warmth, but to make visible the sequence of efforts that once produced it. This approach helps shift attention from spectacle to continuity. The castle's dramatic exterior remains compelling, yet the deeper story lies in the repeated gestures that sustained ordinary days. The building's true resilience was not only in its walls but in the adaptability of the people who inhabited it, individuals who learned, season after season, how to work with materials that could not easily be changed. Across the centuries, that adaptability contributed to broader architectural evolution. Knowledge gained through managing stone interiors informed later preferences for layered construction, controlled airflow, and room proportions that favored heat retention. Even when new residences abandoned the defensive logic of the fortress, they carried forward the practical insights earned within it. Today, stepping into a preserved castle offers a brief encounter with those earlier conditions. The coolness of the air, the way sound travels across high ceilings, and the subdued daylight through narrow openings all hint at an environment once shaped by careful routine. These sensations are subtle, yet they invite reflection on how thoroughly modern comfort depends on systems that operate out of sight. In the widest view, the history of castle interiors demonstrates that habit is as important as structure in determining how a place is lived. Stone alone did not decide the quality of daily life. The patterns of use layered over that stone did. Through attention, cooperation, and incremental adjustment, inhabitants transformed austere spaces into dependable settings for work, rest, and community. What endures now is a record of that partnership. Soot traces mark where fires were tended most often. Altered openings show where drafts were softened. The placement of fixtures reveals where fabrics once hung to hold warmth a little longer. Each detail is quiet, yet together they document centuries of practical problem solving. In this final understanding, medieval castles stand as reminders that permanence in architecture does not guarantee comfort, and comfort does not always require sweeping change. Often it emerges from sustained, modest effort, actions repeated until they become tradition. The people who lived within these walls did not transform stone into something it was not. They learned how to live well enough with what it was. The lasting legacy, therefore, is one of patient ingenuity. Behind the imposing silhouette lies a history measured in small successes. A room kept usable through winter, a night passed with embers still alive, a household that moved in quiet coordination to preserve warmth where it could be found. Through such moments, endurance became livability, and so the castle remains solid, cool, and enduring, while the traces of those countless routines continue to suggest how life once unfolded within it. The story it holds is not only about power or defense, but about the steady human capacity to adapt, to observe, and to care for a place until even the coldest walls can sustain the rhythms of everyday life. As the narrative reaches its quiet terminus, the medieval castle can be understood as a place where endurance and attention met each other day after day. The stone provided longevity, a promise that the structure would outlast storms, seasons, and even generations. Attention, expressed through routine, provided the flexibility needed to make that enduring shell function as a living environment. Neither quality was sufficient alone. Together, they created a form of stability that was practical rather than perfect. This partnership shaped how inhabitants perceived responsibility. A building of such mass could not be set and forgotten. Its livability depended on cycles of inspection and response. Fires were checked, shutters secured, fabrics adjusted, and minor repairs addressed before they grew into larger problems. These actions were not dramatic, yet they formed a continuous thread of care that held the household together through changing weather. Over time, this steady maintenance produced confidence in predictability. Even when temperatures dropped or winds shifted, there was an established sequence of steps that could improve conditions. That knowledge, passed from one generation to the next, became part of the castle's intangible inheritance. The walls endured physically. The practices that sustained warmth endured culturally. Such practices also influenced how space was emotionally experienced. Rooms that consistently offered relative comfort became associated with reliability and calm. Areas prone to drafts or damp were treated as transitional, places to pass through rather than inhabit. These distinctions created a layered sense of interior geography, where meaning attached not only to function or status, but to how a space felt over time. As architectural refinements accumulated, tighter joinery, better glazing, more efficient hearths, the range of comfortable areas expanded. Activities that once required proximity to a single fire could spread into adjacent rooms. Privacy increased, schedules became more flexible, and the building supported a wider variety of daily tasks. The change was gradual, but its effect was to shift the castle from a structure endured toward a structure increasingly shaped for living. Even then, the memory of earlier conditions lingered. Habits formed under stricter limitations, closing barriers at dusk, conserving fuel, clustering activity in colder months, continued as cultural reflexes. They served as quiet reminders that comfort had once been fragile. In many households, these gestures became traditions, carried forward long after newer designs reduced their necessity. When castles later transitioned into symbolic or ceremonial roles, the absence of those daily routines revealed how much they had contributed. Without constant fires and movement, interiors settled into a cooler stillness. Visitors encountered spaces that felt austere, not because they had always been so, but because the practices that once moderated them were no longer present. The building's resting state became its public face. Modern preservation often chooses to respect that state while interpreting the past that animated it. By presenting hearths, textiles, and room arrangements as tools rather than decoration, curators emphasize that livability was achieved through action. The intention is not to recreate a fully warmed environment, but to make visible the sequence of efforts that once transformed cold stone into a workable home. This perspective encourages a broader reflection on how environments shape behavior. Medieval castles required attentiveness, and in return they cultivated skills of observation and cooperation. People learned to read subtle cues, how air moved, how surfaces felt, how long heat lingered. These skills were practical responses to material reality, yet they also fostered a culture that valued preparation and shared responsibility. Across centuries, the lessons drawn from these environments informed the evolution of more temperate residences. Builders incorporated layered walls, controlled airflow, and room proportions that retained heat more effectively. The goal shifted from merely resisting the outside world to creating interiors that could support sustained comfort with less daily effort. In this way, the long experience of castle living contributed quietly to the foundations of modern domestic design. Yet the castle's deeper legacy is not technological alone. It lies in the demonstration that livability often emerges from persistence rather than perfection. Faced with materials that could not easily be changed, inhabitants refined their habits until those materials became manageable. Warmth was never absolute, but it was repeatedly achieved, enough to sustain routine, community, and continuity. Today, the enduring silhouette of the castle still suggests strength and permanence. Inside, the cooler air and echoing spaces hint at the work once required to make such strength habitable. Together, they present a balanced record, architecture that could withstand time, and human practice that could adapt within it. In this final view, medieval castles stand as quiet testimonies to a long partnership between unyielding structure and patient care. Their history is written not only in battles or banners, but in the repeated, modest acts that kept rooms usable, embers preserved through the night, shutters drawn against the wind, people gathered close to shared warmth. Through those acts, generation after generation transformed endurance into everyday life. The stones remain, steady and unchanged, while the traces of those routines continue to suggest how much attention once flowed through these halls. What endures is the recognition that comfort is rarely a fixed gift of architecture. More often, it is something created, protected, and renewed day after day by the people who choose to live within the walls. With the narrative now extended across its full breadth, the last layer to consider is how the memory of living within such environments continues to influence the way castles are understood in the present. Even when their original routines have faded, the buildings still communicate, through temperature, scale, and material, the conditions that once shaped daily life. This communication is subtle, but persistent. It exists in the cool touch of stone, in the way sound travels across vaulted ceilings, and in the filtered quality of light that enters through deep-set openings. These sensory cues act as a bridge between past and present. They remind modern visitors that interiors were once negotiated spaces rather than controlled ones. The experience of stepping from a brighter, warmer exterior day into a subdued, cooler hall echoes, however faintly, the transitions earlier inhabitants navigated repeatedly. In that moment, the building reveals not only its age, but the habits it once required. Because of this, castles often function as places of reflection as much as destinations of historical interest. Their endurance invites questions about what has changed in the relationship between people and their surroundings. Where earlier occupants responded continuously to shifting conditions, contemporary life tends to conceal those fluctuations behind insulation and mechanical systems. The contrast highlights how expectations of comfort have expanded while awareness of environment has diminished. This does not mean that earlier life was defined only by hardship. Rather, it suggests that comfort once existed in a different form, less uniform, more localized, and closely tied to shared activity. Warmth gathered where people gathered. A well-tended hearth created not just heat, but a center of conversation, work, and rest. In this way, environmental management shaped social patterns, encouraging proximity and cooperation in ways that more evenly heated spaces do not always require. Over generations, such patterns contributed to a sense of continuity within households. Repeated actions, lighting fires at familiar times, arranging textiles in established ways, preparing certain rooms for winter use, became traditions that linked present occupants with those who came before. Even as architecture improved, these traditions carried forward an inherited understanding of how to care for a dwelling. When castles transitioned into heritage sites, that inherited understanding risked being reduced to visual display. Modern interpretation has increasingly sought to restore the sense of process behind the appearance. By emphasizing how rooms were used rather than simply how they looked, curators and historians help reveal that livability was achieved through attentive routine. The building becomes legible not only as a relic, but as a former system sustained by daily effort. This perspective also reframes the meaning of permanence. Stone walls suggest something fixed and unchanging, yet the life within them was defined by constant adjustment. Permanence, in practice, depended on flexibility, on the willingness to adapt space, schedule, and material to the realities of season and weather. The castle's endurance was therefore not purely structural. It was sustained by habits that evolved alongside the building. In the broader history of architecture, this lesson remains relevant. Even modern structures, designed with advanced materials and technologies, rely on patterns of use to function well over time. Maintenance, observation, and incremental improvement continue to shape how spaces perform. The medieval castle simply makes this relationship more visible because its materials resist rapid change. Standing within such a structure today, one encounters both halves of that relationship. The stone asserts continuity, while the traces of former routines, soot marks, altered openings, anchor points for hangings, suggest the quiet labor that once animated the space. Together, they form a layered record of how people and building adjusted to one another across centuries. In the end, the long story of temperature inside medieval castles is less about cold as an isolated condition and more about the culture that formed around managing it. That culture valued preparation, shared responsibility, and careful attention to small details. Warmth, when achieved, was appreciated precisely because it was not automatic. It was the product of foresight and cooperation. As newer forms of residence made such effort less necessary, the cultural memory of those practices did not disappear entirely. Elements of them persist in familiar gestures, closing out the evening with drawn curtains, gathering in a central room during colder months, associating firelight with rest and security. These habits, though often symbolic now, trace their origins to centuries when they were essential. The medieval castle thus remains an enduring teacher. It demonstrates that environments shape behavior, and that behavior, repeated over time, reshapes environments in return. Within its walls, generations learned how to create livable conditions without expecting perfection. They accepted limits, worked within them, and gradually improved what could be improved. What survives today is a quiet testament to that patient exchange. The halls may be cooler and the fires long extinguished, but the building still carries the imprint of countless evenings spent preserving warmth against the slow pull of stone. Through those imprints, it is possible to recognize that comfort has a history, one built not only from materials and design, but from the steady, attentive practices of the people who chose to make enduring walls into places where everyday life could continue.